to see. Okay, is this thing on? I'm going to play video. I'm going to play video. I bet everyone can hear this. Hail chat. Let's get going. Here we go. Greetings, pop pickers. Good afternoon, good evening, good golly, Miss Molly. We so like to ball. Here we are, once again, in It's Only Talk and Roll. Me and my esteemed panel. Our IQs have just gone up immeasurably from watching that montage.
That was trippy. It was a blast from the past, man.
Especially considering mine dropped the IQ level when I joined in.
Not at all, not at all. I feel that my instrumental prowess has increased immeasurably. And that means I might be able to play 3 chords now instead of 4. So instead of 4 instead of 3. So welcome again. Yes, today we're going to celebrate the thing that we affectionately know as prog rock, progressive rock. And we're going to pick a little fun, but we're also going to celebrate it. It's that most glorious of genres, the most reviled, but also most loved. And way back in the mists of time, hirsute men. And they usually were men, and I should caveat, I'm not a biologist, so...
They were men.
But they were men. They were tired of the restrictions of the 4x4 blues-based rock and pop, and they decided to go on a musical journey to uncharted waters. And some of them were classically trained, and some were just wizards at their instruments, and some just like to take large amounts of psychedelic drugs, or all 3 at the same time. And they began to do it longer, the songs I mean, and they began to make it harder. I'm talking about the time signatures here, by the way. And in fact, in honor of them, we're going to do today's show in 7/8 time, I think. So be aware of that when you're speaking. so a lot of them infused classical music, jazz music, world music influences, and used the improved technology of the time, particularly keyboard wise. And they, they do things like triple albums, triple concept albums, dizzying time changes, extensive solos that lasted most of a week, and songs about space travel and fantasy worlds and medieval history and goblins and fairies and so on,
Yes.
and then soon came the capes and the costumes and the triple-necked 12-string guitars, the walls of keyboards, the enormous drum kits, of which more later, and the flamboyant touring excesses. But don't get the impression that I'm mocking these bands, though, because some of them are amongst my favourites, but we'll have some fun as well. There will be my top 5 at some point, and there will be some silly prog moments, and also a new concept I'm introducing, because concepts are all very prog, which is the prog or not prog section, where you'll all get to judge in the chat and on the panel whether you think the clip I've played is progressive rock or not. I think we'll have some strong opinions on those ones when we get to them, so lots to look forward to. I'd just like to, for introducing the panel, say hello to everybody in the chat. Thank you all for joining. I can see many regulars here. D-Bud Martin, hail friend. Cosmic Squirrel, Rob Buddy, how are you? Lord Thoth, our Avon Lives friend, and he certainly does. Some guy called Salty Texas C. I think he's a schizophrenic. He's in more than one place at once. Imperatus as well. The very, very wonderful Christian Delorme. Good to see my friend Pope
Who I had
Metallica's
the pleasure
also.
of streaming with on Saturday. That was great.
Yeah, good, wonderful chap. Yes, Janet from Another Planet. Good to see you. Darius Munchausen, who hopefully will join us at some point. So thanks to everybody in the chat for being here, and I would like to introduce, without any further delay, in 7/8 time, my wonderful panel for the day. So first of all, Salty Texas C, how are you, sir?
I'm all right. I had a really amazing, cool chill stream with Heel versus Babyface, Purple Valkyrie, Maxfield Von Priestley, and Zax this morning. Went about 2 hours. Just a really fun show. Thanks everybody who joined. So,
nice, good stuff, mate. Yeah, good. Pope Metallicus, my friend, how are you doing?
Doing well, sir. Thanks for having me back on. It's always a fun time. We get this gang together and smack our heads together.
Well, we've done the head banging. Today will be the head scratching.
Yeah.
We're like, what the hell are they playing here?
Yeah, it might be a bit of that. There's a little bit.
Yes. Are they just tuning up, or are they actually playing?
Is there a difference?
Yeah, there may be no difference in prog rock, but and also joining us, another regular and a good friend of the channel, Imperatus.
Well, thanks again for having me on. This should be interesting considering my taste in music, even though some of the stuff I listen to does kind of fall into the prog category. So,
yeah, and I think that's an interesting discussion, which I like to have at the start of every one of these wide things where we're talking about all genres. What really is that genre? What really makes it? And who's in it and who's not in it, where did it come from? And we had a little bit of chat backstage about that. I mean, I think that what you had was, and I'm probably going to, there's a very British element to this, although there are some US and North American bands involved. There was very much a class thing, I think, in Britain that started this whole thing going. Because back in the day, your grammar school boys, which was your kind of guys like Mick Jagger who were smart enough to go to what they called grammar schools, and they were like the best of the best, but still not paid boarding schools or anything. These were still public schools. They were kind of your blues guys. They had the armfuls of blues albums, and they were into that stuff. Your working class guys were your rock and metal heads. You know, they were from the northern working class areas. That left out the poor university undergraduates, your Genesises of the world and so on, who felt they wanted something of their own too. And I think a lot of those guys gravitated towards what became prog. So I think there's a class element to it in some ways. Yeah, and many of those guys were obviously classically trained in instruments as well. So I mean, Genesis would be the prime example. All public school boys at Charterhouse. And they obviously had a lot of classical music thrust at them and wanted to do something a little more than just, you know, knocking out the 12-bar blues. So I think that's a lot of where prog came from. I don't know what you guys feel, especially given you've got a North American perspective. How does that sound to you?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I wouldn't say you're wrong, but I really can't speak too much on it because I'm not from the UK, so that some of that stuff doesn't really, doesn't jog the noggin, so to speak.
Guys like Emerson, Lake, and Palmer, and that ilk doesn't really strike me as the guys who came up in the bars after work. Like these guys are classically trained musicians that really know their craft.
It's interesting with the blues. Those that you said seem to gravitate toward the blues. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but now that you have, it makes a lot of sense. And you can tell there's some pretty damn clear demarcations in the way that what we all consider, of the very wide net that is progressive rock, right? And especially those who were in the jazz world who took on psychedelic or progressive rock jazz fusion, but I can see what you're saying about when it comes to the Stones and then, in progressing toward the blues. I hadn't thought about classical and the classical influence with more of the working class, though.
Yeah, the working class guys, and it's not all class. I mean, Rick Wakeman's a working class boy, and he's a prog wizard, but although his parents did scrimp and save to send him to a music school so he could, exclusively learn how to play keyboards and so on. They put a lot aside for him to do that as working class guys. It did have an element of that in Britain, but it also had an element, I think, of pop guys who were pop and then became rock. And I'm thinking, let's say, of the Beatles, and who then said, we want to create the classical music of our day, which is pop rock music, and infuse classical elements with rock, not necessarily the other way around. So there may be an element of that in it too, I think. And it is, I think it became, if you look at rock music in the 60s and 70s, it became the classical music of its day, much of it.
Pretty much. I mean, we're talking bands that we'll probably be listening to 100 years from now.
Yeah.
I mean, I would find it hard to believe that, in the year 2100, we're not still listening to Queen and Rush and the Beatles and all that kind of stuff, because that's just timeless music that still really holds up well.
It does, and I think we're 60 years down the line from some of this, and we're still playing it and talking about it. And that's because I'm old.
In my case, it's some of my favorite bands.
Yeah,
and I wouldn't be born for another 30 years after they came out.
Yeah, and that's the way classical music works. People listen to music from it's Beethoven, Mozart, Sibelius, Bach, whatever, you name it. It's all from a long time ago, and good music stands the test of time. And I think prog, while it became fairly put upon in the later years with new wave and punk and then grunge and so on, really was an admirable attempt to expand the boundaries of popular music. And many times succeeded. But so we mentioned the Beatles. I think that they were a big influence from Sgt. Pepper onwards in what a lot of these bands were coming.
They had a lot of very interesting musical influences in their later albums, and it really shows, and kind of did lead more towards the prog side of the house.
Yeah, they started, I mean, for instance, not a lot of people know this, but the Beatles were the first mainstream band to use a Moog, not a Moog. The guy that created it pronounces his name Moog. I'll probably say Moog because I just can't be bothered. But they used a Moog and a Mellotron on Abbey Road. George Harrison owned a Moog, an early one. So they were a big influence in that keyboard sound coming in, because people heard that and went, oh, what is that? The Doors, I think, had a huge part to play from an American perspective.
Yeah.
In with lengthier, jazzier pieces, a lot of keyboard influence. Obviously, you had the Moody Blues, who continued to be, seen as a prog band in the 70s, and they started way back in the 60s doing concept albums. So there was a lot of people trying to push those boundaries, I think, and others said, okay, well, I'm going to build on that. So that's how you got your Genesis, you got your Yes, you got your ELP. In fact, Keith Emerson had been in the Nice, which were a British band, rock band of the late 60s, did this great version of America, Bernstein's America, lengthy solos and keyboard work. And Carl Palmer had been the drummer in Arthur Brown, Crazy World of Arthur Brown, Fire, that Fire, whatever that song. So they'd all been working towards it, I think. Greg Lake, of course, had been in King Crimson, was the vocalist on the first King Crimson album. So there's a band, you mentioned jazz. I mean, to me, King Crimson are more of a jazz band than anything else. And yet they've got that first album of theirs is seen as a landmark in Prog.
And there's some jazz influences in places you wouldn't necessarily anticipate them. Like if we were coming up with a list of jazz-inspired bands, Megadeth probably wouldn't be high up there, but their drummers have all been jazz drummers.
Yeah, that's right, and it's funny how those guys end up like that. I mean, Ginger Baker, of course, was a jazz man. In fact, he kind of despised rock and roll almost, and blues, but he played it because it was money in it, and obviously he was good at it. But he was a jazz man. Jack Bruce too. These guys all had huge jazz leanings.
Yeah,
I think it showed.
And look at Miles Davis and how important the album "Bitches Brew" was. It's the complexity of that album and how important it was from a rock jazz fusion perspective. It isn't my favorite Miles Davis album, I will say that. But I respect it for its artistry, and what it tried to accomplish. We are talking about a lot of hallmarks of progressive rock. We have these long tracks, these long solos. It's there's a lot of really crazy stuff going on, these things. And it was only recorded in like 3 days with these top shelf people. You had Chick Corea, you had everybody knows that. The core Miles Davis band. And yet we were talking about this before the show, is where does the line of progressive rock start and end? And in a lot of these bands, it seemed like they just kind of went out like mushrooms and went into other projects and brought those influences with them.
Yeah. Soft Machine and Robert Wyatt in the UK became an actual jazz band. Started out as a rock band, became a prog rock band, and then went totally into jazz. Which is why Robert Wyatt left them, because he said he just wanted to play rock and roll and get chicks. But
a noble endeavor.
Fair.
A noble endeavor indeed. I got to admire his purism. So jazz was one leaning, but you had guys that were doing the more straightforward. The guys that became more like metal prog, Rush would be a prime example. They could still rock really hard. They just wanted to see how far they could take that.
And they kind of added in like a whole bunch of the progressive rock elements into, what their early albums, I'd call it straight up heavy metal.
Yeah, they started out doing heavy metal. The Working Man, and the first couple of Rush albums are really heavy. Courageous of Steel, Then they became spacey and proggy, but still with that heavy metal or that hard metal edge to it. Mainly because it's guitar focused. Yeah, they had their keyboardy bits, but
and Alex Lifeson is perfect as a metal guitarist.
Yeah,
like he can shred with the best of them, and he also comes up with these really, really slick riffs that everyone just gravitates towards.
Well, indeed, and in fact, this point, I usually try and pull up some pictures. But I've got them. We'll do that soon. I got a whole bunch of. Here we go. This is a great one. I'll just share this. So we're talking about Rush, and we'll talk a lot about Rush, I suspect. There we go. So, this classic 2112 era.
That picture could not be more than 70s if it tried.
That's right.
Yeah.
With Neil Peart still got the tash and the. And funnily enough, the other one that I've got in this bunch is where they both got twin neck guitars. and that's another feature you saw an awful lot in bands like Genesis and Yes was the double neck guitars. Like Mike Rutherford would have a twin neck. He's playing bass on one, and then he switches to the 12-string electric on the top for the quieter passages, then back to the bass for the more upbeat. So using different instrumentation started to become a big thing with these guys. What can I do? Can I have a triple necked guitar? Which,
in the case of Geddy Lee, like, can I sing and play the bass while playing a synthesizer with my foot?
well, that's right, yeah. And then Neil Peart's got a xylophone synthesizers going on and stuff like that. So we'll show a few more of those pictures soon. I'll remove that from there. So yeah, Rush kind of had a metal edge. Deep Purple, Uriah Heep had this kind of Hammond organ metal but progressive thing too, with longer songs, a lot of keyboard stuff. Rainbow we talked about briefly, who I've always seen as a hard rock metal band. When you look, you Pope have a particular view, and Imperatus too, I think, on this. Rainbow are really more of a progressive band in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of their sound is very similar to like early Queen, early Rush, coming out in like 75, 76. They certainly had a lot of the progressive elements in there from the lyrical content, much more the sword and sorcery style of lyrical content. And then even just some of the stuff that they were doing musically with keyboards and stuff like that was much more on the prog side of the house than was standard for metal bands at the time. And eventually, like, prog rock and synth kind of meshed under Rainbow and Queen and turned into what would become power metal later on down the line in the 80s.
Yeah. So there is that edge to it too. Marillion. Now, we don't have to obviously stop to talk about these pictures in passing, but I just wanted to have some of them floating by as we're talking. Marillion are a band I actually admire a lot because they started when punk was at its peak and kept the prog flag flying during that era, when basically all the other prog, Supertramp, all the other prog bands had either split up or decided to go song based or completely change their sound. And I actually knew the original singer, Fish in Marillion. He was my brother's best friend at school, so it's kind of neat. I used to get a lot of backstage at their gigs, and they were prog went underground when punk started, and it became the opposite of what it had been. It became the rebellious underground secret that people would, I'm into prog, but I'm not going to tell anybody. And there was a little underground of prog fans, whereas that used to be the punk thing. Things flipped, So anyway, there's lots of these different influences, but I think that's Van der Graaf Generator, who were a weird English prog band who I quite like. But the big ones are obviously, we're seeing a lot of them here. Pink Floyd.
Yeah, Floyd absolutely has to be in the conversation here.
Yes, I would say with the big three, and then you had maybe Jethro Tull were huge as well, and Rush. So these were the kind of the mainstays of that. There's a ton of other bands like Soft Machine, and I'm a big fan of Mike Oldfield. I think you and I
we were talking about that. Yeah,
Mike Oldfield I'm still a huge fan of it. So he really specialized in those long instrumental pieces, one side on each side of the album. Tubular Bells,
there you go.
Bridge, Omadon.
Yep.
I love those.
Yeah.
I'd put ELO in the conversation here too, because they did a lot of very progressive, very classic
there it is.
pieces.
There it is. Yeah,
absolutely. I would definitely put ELO in. Their earlier albums have got a lot of extended pieces. Well, speaking of the devil, of course, there they are. So there's a lot of stuff in there and a lot of great music. I think what really began to happen was that over time, there was a reaction to many of these bands because your average guy sitting in his bedroom couldn't get a Mellotron and all the gear that they had, so I said, screw it, I'm just going to go back to 3 chords and a cheap guitar. I think it almost the final nail in the coffin for prog as a thing in the 70s, a huge. They loved having naked men on their covers, prog bands as well. Have you noticed that? So was the Emerson, Lake and Palmer the last? I think it was the last world tour they did when they had an orchestra, and they had so many people and so much equipment that they were losing money, like so much money on every gig, that they eventually had to send the orchestra home and go back to just a 3-piece. And that the excess of that tour, like, they had the trucks with, on the roof one was Emerson, and on the next truck it was Lake, and the next one it was Palmer. I think it just probably there's the greatest ever Emerson, Lake and Palmer album, Love Beach.
Jesus.
The that probably started punk alone, that tour.
No, I believe
that
it.
That was probably it, But, there's Mike. He's a love.
Interesting.
Interesting.
You guys see that and like all the production work that goes into it. It's like, fuck it. I'm just gonna go back to playing 3-chord punk in my garage.
Yeah. So
that's kind of how we got bands like Venom out of it, because that was kind of a response to the really high excessive production stuff in the late 70s.
Well, absolutely, yeah. And I just wanted to highlight something D-Bud, who's a great friend of this channel, said Mike Oldfield's Man on the Rocks album, which came out about 4 years ago. It's a straightforward rock album with just songs, not long pieces. It's absolutely brilliant album. If anyone's ever looking for a really great album, lots of catchy rock tunes, very great slide guitar playing, he just did a normal album, and it was brilliant. So have a look out for that. But yeah, hey, Courtney, how are you? Nice to see you. Now, Radiohead, that's a great point. I would definitely see Radiohead as a progressive rock band.
Yes, I would too. I absolutely would too. I want to ask, can I ask a weird question just while we're hanging in I think it's 71 when Led Zeppelin 4 came out. Do you, or can we consider, given some of your criteria for progressive rock with the fairies and gnomes and things like that, right? Could we think, or could we dare to say that Led Zeppelin 4 was partially progressive rock or not? Or is that completely out of left field?
It certainly had a lot of folk influence in it.
I think Zeppelin had a progressive edge to them for sure. Yeah,
they definitely had a prog element
with that album in particular. It's just it just sounded different in a lot of the songs, especially the Tolkien stuff and even Stairway to Heaven. Like a lot of the iconography seemed almost English folk but medieval, or Baroque. With some, and I don't know if you can just say the lyrics and some of the vibe would make it that way. It's just, I've always thought about that because 4 just seems like a very different album for them, and it really seemed to have some of this magical progressive elements to it,
Yeah, I think so. And I think lyrically particularly, they were obviously coming, a lot of their stuff was coming from, not just from the blues, but from the folk-based tradition, which there was a huge strand of in progressive rock too, with some of the Canterbury bands like Soft Machine and Gentle Giant, and you had they'll come back to me in a minute. There was a whole strand of that folk related stuff, but Led Zeppelin 4 is particularly 3 and 4 particularly strong with that. So Battle Forevermore and songs like that.
And just using different inspiration for music too. Like I've always loved the Immigrant Song because the entire riff is based on a train, like on the sound of a train track. It's just like it's really just a really cool idea that they just ran with, and the fact that it's heavy as hell doesn't hurt either.
That's right. Yeah, I think the track that Boreal mentions, Battle of Evermore, is particularly progressive. It's one of the most progressive songs they did, and they were doing that with a limited set of instrumentation. I would think. I mean, they didn't. It's not like they had huge banks of synthesizers. Yeah, they were using Hammond organ a lot, but that's they weren't.
They were hardly alone in that at that time too.
Yeah,
Deep Purple had been doing it for years. The Doors, Uriah Heep was another big one.
Yeah, they were that Hammond sound is a huge thing and influenced a lot. I mean, you guys like Keith Emerson would obviously go back to that a lot, although he had the banks of. In fact, I've got a picture of that somewhere too. The bank of keyboards that he had with the Moog stuff is just like, what the hell, you know? It's how do you ever play that live? Because it's got 400 cables coming in and out of it, you know. Like I just don't get it. But hang on, it's here. Yeah,
Feel bad for their
anyway,
roadies setting all that stuff up.
Yeah.
Plug all that stuff in and then take it all down at the end of the show.
Let me just share this. There you go. So this is a rather small picture, unfortunately, but that's a view of his rig at a certain point. Now,
God,
he's got
that
the
is
Hammond on one
obscene.
side, and he's got whatever on the other side.
I know about
Polyphonic
15
stuff.
PC builders that are just reeing right at that cable management.
Yeah, and then he's got now. What the hell? How do you know where you're putting anything there?
Imagine the amount of heat that those things are giving off.
Oh, especially because
and the
these are all
lights.
vacuum tubes, probably.
Well, some of them would be. Those, yeah, you can see some of them maybe, especially when it comes to maybe some of the homemade pedals and effects stuff. But yeah, it would be early transistor for sure. But look at those things have got to weigh a couple 100 pounds each.
Well,
you know?
that was part of the problem, because when they were touring that this shit was just, it was so heavy, and you're flying it over the Atlantic, it's per pound, you know.
And it's with old electronics like that, you literally have to follow every line. You could have a broken soldered connection, one in there, and nothing, you wouldn't know until you went through 90% of the damn thing. You know, you got to unscrew the back, go through every connection, look for blown transistors and all that other stuff. I mean, God bless them, they made it, but Jesus, that's a.
And I
Yeah,
think
their sound techs probably earned every cent they ever got.
Yeah.
You have to go through, like you say, go through and maintain that thing in between every show, and that's without counting the damage of it coming on and off a truck every day for a year.
Yeah.
I think they were temperamental on stage too.
No,
Very temperamental, like heat,
humidity. Yeah,
it's hot under those lights. Very easy to break something. So it was quite the feat to master that on stage. That's why a lot of the bands just really did it in the studio with that, and then used wherever they could to replicate that on stage. Like German electronic bands like Can, who are all I would also consider to be very progressive, they used a lot of this stuff. So did Pink Floyd, obviously, in the studio, but they really didn't wrangle that out live. They just stuck to more conventional keyboards and Hammond organ, etc. Because this stuff is now you can do it in something the size of a pocket calculator, you know.
Yeah.
Now through the power of laptop, you can basically do all of that and more.
Yeah, well, this is it. You got your Mac or whatever, and there you go. You've got like 3 million keyboard sounds and do whatever you want with it. But then so I admire these guys for that, you know, and I can understand why no guy sitting in his bedroom is going to say, "Well, hey, let's form a band in the high school and we'll do this." But to commit to doing this on stage, I think shows a lot of balls, you know.
And at the same time, too, I think that was a lot of the draw to music like this, was that you couldn't just go down to the local pub and see a band playing this kind of stuff. They had to really hone their craft, and this was a big spectacle.
And they also had to engineer a lot of their own devices. Let's be honest, it's not like you just run down to guitar store and get whatever kind of crazy pedal you wanted to make something like that work. I mean, this guy probably needed to diagram it out and then either built it himself or went to a buddy who knew how to do basic electronics or advanced electronics. Because getting sound output is very different than just saying putting a new tube in something. I mean, you have to you're working first of all with live AC current, and then you've got to do that and then change all these wave amplitudes. Man, I mean, you have to hand wind your own
it's all analog, not digital.
And you had to basically be a sound engineer even to work the damn thing.
Exactly.
Let alone actually make it do anything useful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. By the way, this is Steve Vai's triple neck.
You had guys like Brian May from Queen who literally rigged together his own guitar.
Yeah.
And could play in and out of phase on 3 different pickups.
He built that, yeah. It's an
he still
incredible
uses
feat.
it too, as far as I know.
He still does, yeah. He still uses that same guitar. Now, this is Steve Vai's triple neck, but a lot of bands had in the 70s started to head this way, progressive wise. They'd have double necks, sometimes triple necks. Rick Nielsen of Cheap Trick's got a 5 or 6 necked guitar, and I've seen him play it live.
That's
I don't think he can carry it anymore, though. He's too old now. So
I have enough trouble with one.
That's right. But yeah, that's I do admire the that side of Prog where you see pictures of Rick Wakeman, and I've got some where he's literally encased in keyboards. But at the end of the day, they all keep going back to the Hammond organ or the piano, the grand piano. So if Keith Emerson was finding a bit of trouble with that, he'd say, "Oh, screw it, I'll go and play, Nut Rocker on the piano or something."
Yep, that was the Bruins intro for a long time on TV back in the day.
Nut Rocker, yeah. But so one of the things sorry, I've got so many windows open. One of the things I wanted to talk about that was the sort of sillier things in Prog was Carl Palmer's steel drum kit. So a lot of people will know this story. Obviously, it's fairly famous, but he had, if I just add this back to the stream. So Carl Palmer had built for him, I think it was in 1973-ish, a stainless steel drum kit. That is, the shells were stainless steel. And it was sponsored by British Steel for him. They sponsored it. And they said to him, and it's in that some of the clips at the beginning, by the way, were from a BBC documentary on Prog, which is a really good one if you ever see it. It's on, the whole thing's on YouTube. And they said to him, do you want 1/4-inch steel shells or 1/2-inch steel shells?
Jesus.
And he said, well, what's the difference in price? They said, oh, there's no difference, same price. He said, I'll take the 1/2-inch.
That would like double the weight of the
So he had this thing built, and it ended up looking like this. This is the actual kit, and
Bulletproof.
It's bulletproof, and not only that, he had microphones put in it so that you could hit the drum and it was synthesized. So you'd get the real drum sound, and then the mic would feed somewhere, and it would have a synthesizer, and it would have a synthesized sound. So he could do synthesized stuff as well with it. So it was well ahead of its time with that. But the whole thing weighed something like 2.5 tons.
Oh, shit. Oh, my God.
Guys rolling around with a drum kit.
Oh, my God.
You see him being interviewed about it, and he's pissing himself laughing. He's like, well, look at me, come on. This was the era of excess. And it took 2 roadies to carry the bass drum alone.
I'm not surprised. I think I weighed 600 pounds.
Yeah. So I'm going to just get rid of this comment because poor Imperatus gets hidden by the comments.
Yeah, could be worse.
You're still here, don't worry, buddy. I'll move you up.
I'm not worried about it.
There you go.
Yeah, put me on the bottom.
But
handsome Pope ahead of me.
I just wanted the chat to know I am paying attention to your comments, and thank you for your participation in them. But yeah, it's getting a bit Spinal Tap now. So anyway, this kit, they took it on tour, and they had to have specially reinforced stages built for it.
I was going to ask.
Normal stages are meant to handle 3 ton.
Exactly, and a lot of venues cancelled because they couldn't do it. And he said we didn't think at the time that, because he was in Britain, we didn't think at the time that we'd have to fly this thing over to America. We forgot about that.
Yeah, for 6 months of getting paid for the tour, it was just covering the shipping.
Exactly. They said, how much is that going to cost? Shit.
It's like Sabbath when they do their stage show over here. They can't actually do their whole stage show because part of it, their drum riser in Europe is an actual tank that they had built.
All right. I love that though. That's so metal. But this thing, he did use it for quite a while, and he did take it on one tour, and then maybe not the next one. But you know what happened to this? And I didn't know this until recently. Ringo Starr bought this drum kit.
No way.
Really?
Yeah. Ringo Starr bought it, and he sold it a few years ago. He had a big auction. I didn't know this till recently. Him and his wife Barbara Bach had a big auction and sold off a shitload of memorabilia and instruments and stuff, including this drum kit. I didn't notice how much it went for, but it was in like hundreds of thousands or something. It was a huge amount of money. In fact, the whole auction
for shipping.
Yeah, it's like, it did actually say at the bottom, must pick up yourself. Bring your own truck, So actually, the whole auction that he did, he made something like $10 million or pounds or something of stuff. He sold a lot of Beatles stuff off and whatever. Him and Barbara Bach. So, but he ended up that. Now, whether he ever played it or not, I don't know. But I think Ringo's a little guy, so maybe he would have trouble reaching.
Now, is it just me? And I'm saying this fairly good-natured, but isn't there a level of pretentiousness that comes with prog?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, considering what I listen to, I know
yes.
pretentiousness when I see it. There's a lot of that in the black metal scene too.
Oh, pretentious moi? No, of course.
Yeah.
It was all about pretension. It was, I can play faster, longer, harder, more difficult than you. We can make our album. You've done a 20-minute song. We can do one that's 40 minutes. And, you did one in 7/8, like Money, Pink Floyd 7/8. Well, we'll do one in 28:30 or something, There was an
Pink Floyd
element
was
of
famous
that.
for using weird time signatures in their stuff and driving drummers insane.
Yeah. A buddy of mine, him and his wife are really into prog, and they bust my chops all the time. He's like, "Oh, 4/4 time, huh?" I'm like, "You have a drum kit. Let's see you go play this drum line, please. 4/4 time or not." And then he usually just walks away and gets another beer.
That's right. Yeah. And then some of them tried to do things in no time. Like, so particularly later King Crimson, which I don't like. I mean, I love the first album. The rest is, to me, is like, oh my God, But as Bill Bruford, the drummer, and Darius is just joining us in a second. I'll let you in a second, mate. So Bill Bruford, who was obviously the original drummer in Yes, original drummer in King Crimson, and then rejoined King Crimson later. He said when he rejoined the band later, and Robert Fripp was just a total nutcase, like the exacting nutcase, there's a guitar player. He said they just expected you to know stuff. So there was no, well, you know what, we're going to do this in 6/8 time, but then we're going to switch to Aeolian, blah, 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 blah. It was like, yeah, you're going to know this. Here we go. And he says, it was like just being in a test the whole time. You were being tested. And so that's not fun. He said, but it was great when you knew what you were doing. But also, he said, Robert Fripp always sits on a stool when he plays. He doesn't stand to play the guitar. He sits. And he said, first tour we went on, they didn't bring the stool. He was really grumpy for the 3 gigs until they found him a stool. And then he was like, that's better. I'm happy now. He has to sit down. Anyway, I do love the first King Crimson album. It was groundbreaking. I mean, In the Court of the Crimson King, 20th Century Schizoid Man, that stuff is powerful.
Oh yeah, I mean the early stuff was good, but like you say, they kind of went way off the deep end later.
Yeah, they got into that kind of semi-jazz thing with the sax, modern jazz sax stuff going on, and yeah.
Would you consider any of the stuff the Beach Boys were doing, to use English, during that time to be prog rock? Because there was some trippy AF stuff they were doing.
Yeah,
and
pretty interesting stuff that they did later.
I mean, I'm not saying it was good. It was just different, and I didn't know if we could look at it that way or not,
I think if you look at stuff like Heroes and Villains, which was meant to be part of the Smile album, and I don't think that really came to fruition, that has all the elements that would later become prog staples. It's lengthy piece, multiple pieces in it, different time signatures, a lot of attention to backing vocals and instrumentation. You could say the elements were there.
Yeah.
It's just my take.
Yeah, no, I get it. And it's like, I hesitated to bring it up because it was just, it almost seemed like it was trippy to be, some of the albums like were trippy to be for trippy's sake, and I don't know if that was just overproduced or what, but.
I think it depends whether you can consider music that was made during that psychedelic era when the Beatles and the Beach Boys and others were trying to outdo each other with production standards, and coming up with new things, whether that was really part of what would become prog or was really just a genesis, he said punningly, of it. I think they were certainly forerunners, but by the time guys like Pink Floyd, Genesis, and Yes were really at their peak in the mid 70s, the Beach Boys were back to doing fun and California Girls. I think Brian Wilson wanted to get there, but the others were much more interested in just rock and roll,
making
and
money.
Making money. They would never have been taken seriously in that milieu anyway.
Yeah.
I don't think. I may be wrong. I mean, don't get me wrong, I adore the Beach Boys. I like the 70s Beach Boys output.
Yeah.
A lot of the later stuff, I Can Hear Music and Do It Again and Wild Honey and stuff. I love that stuff, but I think they were this is the underpinnings of it. It was guys trying to take the standard guitar bass drums and do something different. And then these guys took it a little further. So, I mean, there's a world of difference, I think, between Pink Floyd One of These Days and, I don't know, something on Sgt. Pepper. There's it's just an extra step beyond that, you know.
So do you consider Sgt. Pepper's to be prog rock?
I think it's one of the progenitors of it, if I could put it that way. I think a lot of guys would say, "Oh my God, look what you can do with this rock music milieu that we'd never thought of before." So
Nerdporeal Lifeform says Pet Sounds was pretty progressive, and that's the one album I didn't want to bring up because I'm still. I mean, it is almost in its own class, I think, especially for the production value and what they did at that time. It's on, you know, not only that, but it's I don't know, and that's part of the reason I brought up the Beach Boys. You know, was just that they were doing some trippy stuff, but could you call it progressive? I don't know.
No, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily put them in the progressive rock category in the same way I wouldn't say the Kinks were a heavy metal band. You know,
Or would that be psychedelic rock?
Fair.
Yeah, especially for the time they came out, I would put bands like Hawkwind in the progressive category.
Well,
'cause
I've
they
got
were very
Hawkwind on my
psychedelic.
list.
Yeah.
Hawkwind are definitely in there. And they're in the spacey side. I loved that stuff as a kid because I was into science fiction.
Yep.
So when I saw an album, you know, album titles like Hawkwind's albums, and so I heard what they were doing, I thought, my God, that's great. They're talking about space and aliens and galaxies, and the same with some of the Yes stuff was about that. And then you had Rush. I mean, when they did 2112, I thought I was going to die. You know, this is, my God, it's a science fiction album.
I mean, by far, they did 3 songs that I considered the 3 greatest sci-fi rock songs of all time. In 2112 and both halves of Cygnus X1, that are both just musically fantastic and lyrically they're all just way out there. The 2112 is becoming a little too close to home at this point.
Yeah, and do you think the fact that they were just a 3-piece band as well made it even more impressive?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's all the sounds that they were able to do with just 3 guys and a whole bunch of instruments and pedals is just incredible. What they were able to accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in awe of. I've always been in awe of Rush, especially having seen them a couple of times, and I think, how do those guys do so much? It's incredible. Now, obviously, on albums they can do all little fiddly pieces, but live, when Geddy's playing the bass pedals with his feet, he's playing a keyboard with one hand, he's doing something else with the other hand. Then he switches to the bass while still playing pedals to get keyboards.
And singing the whole time.
And singing. Well, if you can call that singing.
I do.
Fair. Very fair.
Actually, I saw Primus this past year do A Farewell to Kings.
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
That was just phenomenal. They did like half a set of their own stuff. It's like, you know, Winona's Big Brown Beaver, all that kind of stuff. And then they transitioned into A Farewell to Kings by Rush. And it was really cool just to see a band play 2 completely different sounds on one night in one set.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I love that. I just wanted to interrupt to say, Hail Darius, how are you, my brother?
Oh, frip off.
Frip off. Shut the front door.
No, I was going to say, hello. Is there anybody in there?
I think you were quoting. Were you quoting the Bare Naked Ladies earlier?
Yes,
I knew you'd catch that. Yeah, Salty was saying, you know, what he loved about by the Beach Boys. I'm saying, well, what I love by the Beach Boys is lying in bed, just like Brian Wilson did.
said. That's Canada's second greatest progressive rock band, the Bare Naked Ladies.
Well, here's a question: when did you think Pink Floyd went from psychedelic to prog?
Oh,
That is a great question.
I would say for me, it's one particular track, Echoes, is when they made the switch from, because the rest of that album was very psychedelic until you got to Echoes.
Yeah.
And then going forward from that point, like Animals, which is one of my favorite albums, is definitely a prog album.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Metal's a progressive album. I think they were a progressive band by that time. Like from the Pompeii gig onwards, I think they were firmly in the progressive camp. You know, they'd stripped out any meandering psychedelic noodling, and it was all full-on prog. I mean, One of These Days is just, to me, is a magnificent example of, in fact, maybe in my top
And
five.
then and later Pink Floyd too, you get that, and some other prog bands had this too, where you had that funk influence come in the mid '70s. Like two I love to bring up are Another One Bites the Dust and Dragon Attack off the game.
Oh, Dragon Attack's great, yeah.
And they have that funk bass line. And actually, the funny part is we have Michael Jackson to thank for Another One Bites the Dust even being released, because they were actually not going to put it on the album.
You make a good point, because you could say being progressive is not just about, you know, the sort of elements that made bands like Genesis and Yes popular, but anything that takes the style of music forwards into something different. And if that means incorporating disco and funk elements into to a rock genre, absolutely, it's progressive.
And Queen certainly did that in their later output. I mean, they had full-on synth rock songs.
Yeah. Can I ask a very provocative question? And I don't know the answer to this, but considering
Darius will not take his clothes off.
Well, never mind then.
But you don't know.
Never mind. No. So Pink Floyd, I think we could have a lot of discussions about all of the albums and where they fit and where they went. Where do we think the Dark Side of the Moon falls on this? Where do we consider this prog rock or not?
I do.
Because
Absolutely.
to me, because to me, it seems like the gold standard almost. And it came out in 73, which seemed to be this year of really trippy experimental stuff across the board, you know?
I think you're right. It's a gold standard. I mean, it's I know, and these things sort of become cliches, but you can't talk about prog without talking about Dark Side of the Moon.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just this massive thing there, which perhaps showcases the possibilities of rock music better than most other albums ever.
This is just a quick aside, but The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking has an album. I would consider that to be progressive rock too.
I would too, yeah. Hang on, I'm gonna just I got images.
Not everybody's into that, but I really liked that when I was in high school. I used to listen to that on cassette a lot.
So I like this adaptation of Dark Side of the Moon's cover. I personally kind of prefer Amagama, but that's just me.
Sure.
Because maybe it's a reaction to having heard Dark Side of the Moon a million times now. So I like to go a little further back. But Dark Side of the Moon is a cornerstone. I think another one I would probably pick as a cornerstone of prog would be Selling England by the Pound by Genesis. Which is, to me, their first complete album.
Yeah.
I would definitely put Moving Pictures by Rush in there, in that category as well. Because, I mean, when you talk about their classic output, you have YYZ, Limelight, all the great songs.
Yeah, true. True. Yeah.
Either that or 2112.
2112, I would have gone for, I think, almost, because I think it's just the fact that the concept on it is so good. And lyrically and taking that whole... we have assumed control. You know, it's just the whole concept sits really well, and to be able to do that with three musicians and make that concept and story come alive was just something incredible, you know.
And just do like a 20-minute rock symphony.
Yeah. That's a good word, symphony, yeah. And
include everything in there and just make it sound like a whole complete piece of music, and that wasn't even the entire record.
Yeah. I want to pop back to something, we're not going to moving away from Pink Floyd, I don't think, but I want to pop back, there was a little bit of discussion around 10cc. One of my favourite bands of all time, and indeed the first band I saw live. I would call them, it's this weird thing, progressive pop. Because they were a pop band who had chart hits, but they loved to do different things on their albums, and they did some really, really interesting and different stuff. Totally unlike their hit singles. So I would never have really classed them too heavily as a progressive rock band, but they're almost like progressive pop, if that's a thing, you know.
I mean,
we're being genre-y. we're kind of pigeonholing people, but I do love 10cc, and there's some tracks of theirs that would fit very well into this. Like Somewhere in Hollywood on their sheet music album is a beautiful, beautiful track with some beautiful instrumentation, and long track would probably fit very well. We could have fitted on a Genesis album. Let's put it that way. So.
Well, it's funny how Genesis ended up though, when people like my mom were buying their albums when like Invisible Touch came out.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, there's a great. I know we've flipped about a bit, and forgive me for doing that, but because the Floyd, we could have multiple shows on Pink Floyd alone.
Yeah, I didn't mean to derail things, dude.
I
was trying to put it in a place where like it's progressive, but it could also be so much more than that, you know?
I think if you're looking at milestones, Dark Side of the Moon, particularly for the general public, would be a milestone. They could say, "Oh yeah, I know that album. That's progressive rock."
Yeah.
I mean, I've described it, and some people don't mind me saying this, and some people get a little offended, but I say it's commercial prog.
Yeah,
And
a good one.
that's what I was wondering, because
it's good. I like it.
It's good, but it's
one
kind
of the two
like
albums everybody knows from Pink
And you can
Floyd.
play the songs on the radio.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
And it's one of those rare occurrences too of something can be good musically and still sell well. I mean, look at Paranoid by Black Sabbath.
Yeah.
I mean, the album sold like hotcakes, and that doesn't mean it's not a good or very heavy record.
Right. I've never heard any of the songs from Animals played on the radio. You know.
Yeah, I can't say I have either.
Dogs is 20 minutes long.
That's right.
And I think that album was like the high prog mark. Not to say that it's better than Dark Side of the Moon, but I think it's sort of the peak of their progressive tendencies.
Yeah, I think so. And then, although I mean, to be fair, The Wall could be seen as the epitome of prog. Although that's more a concept album than prog album.
I was going to ask that as a follow up, but I figured just because, and that it's almost like, that would be a whole show just talking about those two albums and how alike and very different they are. Yeah,
and I think we'll get there one day, because what I just to divert slightly, what I've been trying to do with these It's Only Talk and Rolls is to introduce a number of shows about genres, and then I think eventually we're going to start drilling into specific bands, specific periods, specific albums, whatever takes our fancy. Certainly, we'd like to do a follow up to the Who show we did a few weeks ago. So a second show on the Who, because we really only scratched the surface there.
I don't even think we really got out of Quadrophenia.
Well, yeah, I mean,
we still have another decade or two to talk about. That's
right. We didn't go anything past that, yeah, and we kind of, and it's a 3-hour show. What can you do in 3 hours, you know? So really, my concept has been, and I appreciate you guys being on the panel and helping with this, is to just kind of bring the genre into focus a little bit, talk about some of the key players, and then over the years to come, I think we'll do some deep dives. So, anyway, that's just my little blurb for the show. But yeah, the Floyd are a thing in their own right, whether you call them prog or not. There's something in there that stands alone on their own. But I definitely think they were, to me, the holy trinity of prog. Pink Floyd, Genesis, and Yes. I'm not a big ELP fan. I get that they were a big part of that. You could say they were the fourth one. I like a bit of guitar, and there's no guitar in the LP. No, it's funny because
it's very, very quiet.
Very, very quiet. I mean, Greg Lake played some acoustic on Lucky Man and stuff like that, but
that's one of the only songs by ELP I'm a really big fan of.
Yeah, I do like Fanfare for the Common Man and their version of that Aaron Copland piece. Although if you listen to the album version, there's a little too much noodling in the middle. But the single, funnily enough, the 7-inch single version is better, and it absolutely rocks.
One band I'm actually kind of surprised we haven't brought up yet is Fleetwood Mac.
Well, the Mac are it depends which Fleetwood Mac we're talking about.
Yeah, that's very true. They did have some very distinct periods in their history.
Yeah, because you've got the original blues-based Fleetwood Mac with Peter Green. Then you've got that kind of mid-period after he and Jeremy Spencer had left, and Danny Kerwin was the main guy, and they became a little more progressive. And then they went back when the Buckingham Nicks joined. They became more just straightforward rock, I would say.
Yeah.
AOR, adult-oriented rock. So there's some stuff in there that could be seen as progressive, but I wouldn't have necessarily thrown them in here. But there's a good point, because I had Supertramp in this list of bands. And yet they had enormous pop hits too, like Breakfast in America. But you could say that albums like, Even in the Quietest Moments were prog albums with extended instrumental pieces, with multi-part songs, compositions, if you will.
Did you see Doc's question?
I did not. Where is he?
Where he said, what is the definition of prog rock? Sorry if already asked. It is such a... that is the question, isn't it?
That is still the question that we've been talking about for an hour now.
Because even some people can consider a lot of the stuff I listen to progressive in some ways.
Yeah.
Which is bizarre in its own right, but what's even more bizarre is both the prog rock scene and the underground metal scene have bled into each other.
Yep.
Bands like Opeth on the metal side going more progressive, and then Steve Wilson and Porcupine Tree leaning more into the metal side of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And right in the middle, you have Dream Theater.
Dream Theater.
Dream Theater. Yeah. So what? So Imperatus, could you just expand on that a little, if you feel like it? But what you think today those prog bands look like? I mean, you mentioned a couple of bands there. What is that scene like? Because I'm not.
It's
quite as
weird
familiar.
because, like I said, I have friends that are heavy into prog rock, and they despise the first few Opeth albums, even though they were still progressive, just really kind of heavy. Stuff like Morning Rise and Nectar were very progressive albums for the metal scene. People weren't doing, when those came out in the early 90s, people were still playing just brutal death metal, and it was the beginnings of the second wave of black metal. So, and that's where they came along, and that's how I first discovered Opeth, was on a black metal comp.
Yeah.
And then they did something with Steve Wilson. I don't remember exactly what. And next thing you know, my friends are like, "Here, check this out. You'll probably like this." And it was a Porcupine Tree album, and it sounded like Opeth. Same kind of heavy, but still proggy sound.
Yeah, Steve Wilson's really been the mainstay of the prog. He's a prog flag carrier and has been for a long time now. I'm not hugely familiar with some of the material you've talked about, but I'm certainly into it.
But then you also, even prior to that, there's a Finnish band called Amorphous.
I love Amorphous.
They started in the early 90s, and they started off as just a pure Scandinavian death metal band. But by their second albums, they were doing stuff like adding analog keyboards and synthscapes, not like how it is nowadays, but like it sounded more like an 60s or 70s style of keyboard. And they've slowly and surely got more and more progressive. By the time when like Elegy came out, you couldn't even call them a death metal band. I mean, they still were, but they were definitely progressive death metal. And that is a thing in the underground metal scene. You will see bands be described as progressive death metal, progressive black metal. Because then you also had bands coming out of Norway like Ulver. First three albums, each album was 100% different. The first one was more of a progressive metal album. The second one was an acoustic folk album.
Yeah.
And then the third one was a lo-fi, sounding like they recorded in an attic black metal. And they all came out within a couple of years of each other.
Yep, the magazines didn't know what to do with them.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that actually got me into that scene is like, you did have your bands like Marduk, Dark Throne, Dark Funeral, Mayhem, which was just punch you in the face, aggressive black metal. No bones about it. But then you also had some guys doing some weirder stuff like In the Woods, Amorphous, Opeth. Sweden especially, you started hearing a lot more melody in the guitar work and trying to bring in.
A couple Dimmu Borgir albums were pretty much similar.
Yeah.
Well, now we have bands like Wolves in the Throne Room, or arguably Deaf Heaven. I'm not saying I
There's
listen
some
to Deaf
groans
Heaven.
there.
I do kind of like Wolves in the Throne Room, though, even though they're vegan.
Yeah. I think it's I mean, I'm not desperately. I know I've been doing these shows based upon genres, but I'm not desperately keen to genre. Tag everybody into a genre. I think music's so fluid, but I think there are elements that make up certain genres, and progressive for me is progressive rock would be anybody that sees instrumental prowess as key,
Yeah.
Anybody that wants to do things that are outside of the normal format of standard rock, or indeed whatever flavor of rock they're doing.
Very technically focused while doing it too.
Yes.
Very technically focused.
I would say so.
Especially
That's a good
incorporating
way.
new technologies into the music as well. Like,
Yeah.
you know, in the 70s, it was all about the synths. And then later on in the 80s, you had a little bit different recording techniques and stuff like that started coming out. And the prog rock guys were always the first to jump on those bandwagons.
Yeah, and I think that technical piece and the instrumental prowess piece is a huge part of it, you know. So that could cover an awful lot of bands that people wouldn't. And there's the king of the cod piece himself, the demon of the seaman. But yeah, you could. There's King Crimson. Yeah, you could actually John Wetton on bass in that one. But you could see a number of bands that are people wouldn't say are progressive, but they are because they're progressive in their own genre.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's kind of like what I was talking about. It's
and I just focus on the older ones because I'm old.
No,
I could certainly see Iron Maiden being put in that category in a lot of ways too.
Well, they've done a lot of extensive pieces with stories. Storytelling is a huge part of it too. We tend to think of the music and these big solos that guys would do, like Keith Emerson or whatever. But a lot of it is the lyrical content and the stories they tell. 2112 is a story. You know, a lot of bands, if you're trying to make a story out of the thing that isn't just about the music, that could be seen as progressive, you know?
I mean, hell, Rush even had a story that carried over between albums with Cygnus X1.
Yeah. So I think that's a large part of it.
Well, with that in mind, where would you fit in King Diamond?
That's an interesting question.
Yeah. Because all of his albums up until fairly recently were all concept story albums, and he had one that crossed over 2 albums with them and Conspiracy.
Yep.
It's a good point that Renard making about brain salad surgery, and I think I've got it on my slideshow of covers. It could have been a Geiger.
I believe it was Geiger.
Geiger.
Moog. I'm pretty sure that he did design that album cover.
Yeah, I think he did, and it's a brilliant cover, and it's got the fold-out bit in the front. I think that one, if I remember rightly. But there's some great albums in the. I mean, the Roger Dean stuff I love. I've actually met him, and I've got a signed poster of Roger Dean.
Well, and that album was extremely heavy, in my opinion, despite having no guitars.
Asia.
So the no guitar thing is an interesting one because Van der Graaf Generator, who were a fairly successful British prog group, no guitars. Although Pete Hamill played a little bit guitar. Obviously Emerson, Lake and Palmer, no guitar. Lots of these bands had no guitar players in the prog world. Manfred Mann's Chapter 3, which was his band before the Earth Band, no guitar. He said, I want no guitarists, just keyboards. Personally, I prefer a guitarist, but that's just me. So Asia, great band. But it's funny what happened to some of these bands. Prog, because it eventually became a dirty word, bands either died, I think, like Procol Harum split up and bands like that and gave up the ghost when punk came in and new wave. Yeah. Other bands like Genesis, somebody mentioned it earlier, they reinvented themselves as a 3-minute pop song band. So did Yes, in a sense.
Yeah, Roundabout and Lonely Heart.
Yes, went with the Trevor, and I like the Trevor Rabin era of Yes. I like his guitar playing, and he was the guitar player in that period.
To a certain extent, Cheap Trick as well. They really reinvented themselves in the 80s. Although that's a band that has so many different sounds. It's hilarious that I'll hear 2 songs from them and I can't even tell it's the same band. I'm not paying attention.
If you're listen to the deep cuts on their albums, they've got some very interesting stuff that isn't just the 10 hits that they play in the short concerts they do now.
Blue Oyster Cult as well, to a certain extent. They certainly had a lot of the synth going on.
I forgot about the Cult, actually. The Blue Oyster, not the Cult, they're another band. The Blue Oyster Cult were a very progressive rock band. One of the leading North American ones in that category, I'd say. I mean, you've got Blue Oyster
Cult. Some of their late 70s, early 80s stuff, like Veteran of the Psychic Wars and all that kind of stuff, was very proggy.
for sure. They straddle that world. There's a bit of metal in there. There's a bit of prog, probably more prog than metal, I would say. But
To an extent, yeah.
and I was quite into Kansas back in the day. I mean, they were a
There it
prog
is.
rock band. Yeah,
There it is.
Budgie,
Asia
this-
Alpha.
I love that
Sorry.
cover by Budgie. It's an actual bird, but it looks like a jet. It's brilliant. These are all Roger Dean covers. Great band, Budgie. Yeah,
And
that
even,
album there, Drama.
even
That's
Sabbath
we're going to
kinda
come back to that
experimented with
album
prog.
later, because I
With
think
that.
it's about time I introduced my "Is it prog or not"
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
section. So, let me just stop this nonsense.
Stuff and nonsense.
Stuff and nonsense. Let me remove this from the. Yeah, so we've been talking a lot about what is prog and what isn't prog, and I decided to put a few clips together, and I'm going to get I want the chat involved in this, and I really do appreciate you all being here. Thank you for coming. I see a lot of familiar faces and
Yes.
great supporters of the channel, and I
Okay.
really do appreciate it. Hello? Pope's
I'm sorry.
Pope's pizza has been delivered. His curry's
I can
been
pre-
delivered.
I wish.
I can pretend to be him if you want. But
So we're going to do a thing which is it prog or not? And I want strenuous arguments on both sides. I just don't want these to be dismissed out of hand as not prog, okay? And some of them are trick questions. So we'll start with that, and I want the chat to join in, and we'll vote on it. So Courtney's here. Hang on, I'll let Courtney come in first. Hey, Courtney.
Hey.
In
Sorry, I'm
fact,
bright red. I was kind
no.
of rushing.
Now that you're here, I can even play this clip.
Are there any women here today?
Because there usually isn't. So, apart from you, Courtney, you're the only one. Purple hasn't been able to join us, unfortunately. She might
I'm
meet
used to
the
being
next
the
one.
only chick sometimes. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
but
have
you
four brothers. I'm used to it.
you make up for it though, because your IQ is better than all ours combined.
Oh,
So,
I would not say that.
so anyway,
Definitely not.
prog or not prog is the question. We will start with clip number 1. Enjoy. British vocal group, huge hit in the early 80s, Bucks Fizz, Land of Make Believe. Is it prog or is it not? In the chat, you can put a Y for yes and N for no. I'm going to argue it is prog, particularly lyrically. Over to you, panel.
I'm nodding my head.
I could
Yes.
certainly see an argument to put them in the prog category.
Now, you don't have to say yes, of course. You're perfectly willing to argue no.
you told me the backstory, so I can't answer this question. So,
This is a trick question, this one. But yes, so what do you think in the chat? Did anybody feel that Bucks Fizz were Land of Make Believe is a prog epic, or is it just pop shit?
It can be both.
Or could it be both?
I thought it had a real heavy photocopy of ABBA vibe.
It did, didn't
As you know, and that's what led me to my answer.
ABBA in space.
it? Disaster Area has twigged it. He's twigged the trick to the question. So, do we say yes or no?
Can I
That's
tell you
a
why I think yes?
Yeah.
I think yes because of the kind of like choral aspect. Like it's more of like it's a bigger production kind of. I don't know. I can't
Yeah.
explain it very well, but
Okay.
go.
Cool. Well, I am going to say I think it is prog, but not necessarily for the musical reasons.
Mm.
The writer of that song, as Disaster Area twigged, is Pete Sinfield, who wrote King Crimson's lyrics. So I think that counts as prog. So we're
I
going
think
to
so.
give it a yes on that.
Prog-ish.
I'm so proud of that clip. So we're counting that as prog. I'm willing to hear the arguments that say no, but because of Pete's infield, it's prog. And well done to Disaster Area for getting that one right. Shall we do another one?
Yeah.
Or should I save them for later? Let's do one more.
Let me let you guys do this. I have to split. I've got a dog thing that I have to.
All right.
do.
Well, you able to come back later, or
let me see how the dog is. I also need to get dinner going too. So I don't want to break my promises, but I want to say this has been a great conversation, and you got me thinking about bands and progressive rock and the crossover of this in ways that I haven't thought of in a long, long time. So, Brian, you're rocking this stuff, dude. This is great. Great.
Thanks,
stuff.
mate, and thank you for your being here. I really do appreciate it. It's always a great pleasure, man.
It was good seeing you.
Good seeing you guys.
friend.
Great having you, Salty.
Yeah.
I'll have to have you on the
Excuse me.
channel one of these days.
Thanks for hanging out.
We'll talk some records.
Yeah, man. And have a good show. You guys, with a topic like this, you're going to have a lot of fun. See you later.
Okay, mate.
Bye.
Take care. Right, we'll do one more of these, and I'll save a couple for later. But let's try this one.
Calling occupants of interplanetary craft. Calling occupants of interplanetary.
The Carpenters, calling occupants of interplanetary craft. Is it prog or is it not?
I say no, but I got to take this call really quickly. I'll be right back.
All right. You can't get away with that easily. You have to say why. Okay.
I mean, lyrically, it certainly has prog elements to it. I don't know if that alone would count it, but musically, I don't hear a lot of prog in there. Pretty standard fare for the Carpenters, just with a little bit more of a space theme behind it.
Yeah, Darius, how do you feel about that one?
To me, that is space rock, and I don't necessarily agree with Nerdporial that space rock is always prog rock.
That just leaves you, Imperatus.
No, I'm going to go with the same thing that Darius said. Space rock and prog rock are two kind of different things. Even though prog does have some spacey elements, again, I can point to another band in my scene from Sweden called Oxyplagats, which is Isaac Asimov metal.
Oh, Asimov metal, that would be good.
I'll see if I can't dig up the album cover. You can see.
Oh yeah, if you want to show, you guys ever want to show anything on the screen, just do it. Let me know. But yeah, dig that up. But I have the two opposing views. One is that yes, lyrically, you could say it's quite proggy because of the concept of the lyrics. It has multiple time changes in it. It has that great fuzzy guitar solo that the Carpenters had in a lot of their records. And it was written and originally recorded by Klaatu, Montreal band, who were pretty proggy.
Klaatu Barada Nikto?
Klaatu was that's right, and that's where they got the name. And Klaatu were actually originally, back in the 70s, they had this whole thing going that they were supposedly the Beatles reformed under another name, and nobody ever saw who they were. They played that out for as long as they could, but it eventually had to reveal that they were from Montreal. I think somebody in the chat, Disaster Area, twigged that. The original is very proggy, but I think, much as I love the Carpenters, I'm going to go for no. I think the consensus has been no on that one, so... So we're saying not prog, so sorry Carpenters, you're gone. Much as I love that record.
Brahma said prog pop.
Prog pop. Well, it is prog pop, really. The Carpenters were an interesting act because, yes, on the surface, extremely MOR, extremely safe, but they had a lot of really nice tunes. It's weird. And Karen Carpenter is one of the best singing drummers in history, so... not a lot of people know that she was the drummer, but she was. So speaking of drummers, no, we did Carl Palmer, didn't we? We did his steel drum kit. I think another burning question in prog has to be, and I think it's a question that needs to be addressed because everybody's got an opinion on it. We've touched on it briefly, and if I could get my mouse to work, we'd touch on it even more. But my mouse has decided it doesn't want to work anymore. Oh, there we go. So one of the big questions that causes endless arguments in university undergraduate bars around the world is the burning question of Gabriel versus Collins as Genesis singer. So I think we need to address that if we're going to be able to move forward in any prog discussion. So Gabriel versus Collins, prog-lebrity deathmatch, as I'm calling it. So, opinions. Which one was the best Genesis singer? Which was the best era of Genesis? Has anyone got any opinions on this?
I mean, I would definitely put my hat on the Phil Collins camp. Just even for his own work, I would say he's by far the better singer than Peter Gabriel, although I enjoy both of them.
That's
Sultry
good.
Hill's
Yeah.
still one of my favorite songs.
Yeah, interesting point of view. Absolutely, mate. Yeah, and very worthy.
I'm going to counter that. I
Courtney's
say
going to
Peter
give
Gabriel.
for the case for the defence. Courtney, Amber Courtney. No, sorry, I didn't.
No, you don't. Courtney Depp or something like that.
Courtney Depp. So you're more of you lean towards the Gabriel in Genesis side.
Yes.
Okay. Would there be any particular reason for that?
I might be going also based on his like solo stuff as well, but I just feel like he went more in that direction.
Yeah. Okay, fair point. Yeah.
I kind of
That
agree with
is.
Courtney
Have
on that.
you feelings, strong feelings on the matter?
I don't know if I'm fully qualified to answer this question, but as far as I'll just go with a gut feeling, and I think I prefer Phil Collins over Peter Gabriel. Although Phil Collins never shocked the monkey.
He did not shock the monkey. That is true, and he never stood on Salisbury Hill. I do not believe, but and that just leaves Imperatus, I think.
I kind of agree with Courtney in the fact that I lean towards the Peter Gabriel side of things because his music kept in that prog vein over the years, whereas with Phil Collins, it started leaning more into the, as you put it, the 3-minute radio song.
Pop music.
Pop music, yeah. And yes, even his solo stuff is kind of proggy, but at the same time, it still leans into the radio-friendly side of things.
Mm-hmm. Or the Tarzan soundtrack.
Yeah, how many prog stars have you seen doing soundtracks for Disney movies?
Well, I mean, maybe not Disney movies, but I know Foreigner did the soundtrack to Dune.
Yeah.
Was that Toto?
No, sorry, yeah,
Toto,
Toto. You're right. I
Toto.
don't know why I went with Foreigner on that one.
Yeah, well, I mean, there was a time that Elton John was considered fairly proggy, like Goodbye Yellow Brick Road era, and he did do various Disney soundtracks, but
And Queen certainly did their fair share with Flash Gordon and the Highlander
true.
soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
Oh,
but
yeah.
some of the Disney stuff is probably a step too far.
A lot of love for Peter in the chat.
Yeah, I'm just looking at some of the chats. So we've had a few Phils, we got some Peters. And Arboreal is clearly poppy. I see this. I do have a slightly different view of that in that after Gabriel left, I believe it or not, as much as I love Peter Gabriel, I like the series of albums Genesis made after that. So Trick of the Tail, Wind and Wuthering, and then there were 3, which is my personal favorite Genesis album. Not many people would say that. And Duke. I love that series of albums. You can see them starting to move with Duke towards the 3-minute, shorter, radio-friendly stuff. But I still think those are magnificent albums.
Do you have that clip from American Psycho?
Oh, I wish
this
I had.
moment?
Have you got it? Do you want to?
It was really on Duke. I might have it on my channel, but it was really on Duke that they came into their own.
Gabriel is the more experimental artist in general, though. Although I have to give Phil Collins kudos for largely with Gabriel's prompting to do the thing with no cymbals. That because Collins played on Peter Gabriel's 3rd album at least. He might have played on others, and he said, "I want no cymbals." So that's drum sound on that album. It's where he then took the drum sound for his own solo album for In the Air Tonight. So Peter Gabriel wanted him to do that, and he liked it enough to do it in his own stuff. Peter Gabriel, actually, believe it or not, was a drummer too in the very early days of Genesis, but he decided to give it up to do the singing. So Phil Collins was the 4th drummer in Genesis. Not a lot of people know that.
I never knew that. Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that.
So I do love both. But I'm going to just fall on the side of Phil Collins as long as we're only talking up to Duke and not after that.
There's a long-standing tradition in prog bands of having absolutely fantastic drummers. I mean, you have Phil Collins with Genesis and Peter Gabriel before him. You have Neil Peart from Rush. You have Carl Palmer.
Yeah.
Which all three of them were just fantastic.
Indeed. I do like a good singing drummer, I have to say. And it's a rare thing, and I do like that. I like it when you see there's certain bands I've seen in the past that have had they're like there's lead singers. Some bands have got their drummer as the lead singer, and it's quite an achievement. But
well, the Eagles did that with Don Henley quite a bit.
Don Henley does it live, on stage.
It's even more impressive when it's in like the underground metal scene. The band Autopsy did that. Their drummer was a singer, and they were brutal death metal. So it's like, wow, you got pretty good control over your entire body then, because you're singing like that and playing incredible blast beats.
It is an incredible thing. Doyle Brammell, who's one of my favorite artists, sadly deceased now, he was the drummer and singer in his own band, and he was the guy that he was a mentor to Stevie Ray Vaughan, albeit a different instrument, but as an artist he was his mentor. In fact, their vocal style is eerily similar. But he was a great singing drummer, Doyle Brammell. So I'll just lean on the side of Collins, because I just think he brought a little more accessibility to the band. And funnily enough, he gets a lot of the blame, I think, for Genesis becoming ultra commercial, but the other two didn't seem to put up much of a fight to making millions of dollars and becoming pop stars. So
another band that kind of took that trajectory from this era was the Police.
Yeah. Well, the Police could be said to be a fairly progressive band too, actually, when you listen to
Synchronicity. They certainly had a lot of prog elements in it.
Yeah. Anyway, so that was something I felt needed to be talked about.
Well, here's another question too, kind of along like the one that posited earlier. But how would you feel about some new wave being considered prog?
Well, Courtney may have a view more than me on that, but I would see certain punk new wave bands definitely morphed into what could be seen as a progressive mode. I would certainly cite Joy Division / New Order, but as a prime example, but the Cure certainly could be said to go that way.
Yeah.
Did you say New Order, the band? Is that what you said?
Yes. So Joy Division and New Order.
Bizarre Love Triangle kind of. I can definitely. Those are good examples. Even like Adam Ant went into some kind of like weird.
There's a Phil Collins connection there too, of course, because some people say Phil Collins ruined Adam Ant by producing and playing drums on his big hits. But,
I would even say Killing Joke falls into the progressive side of things.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
They started off as pure 80s style new wave and have morphed over the years into something completely different on almost every album.
Yeah.
What was John Lydon's band, Johnny Rotten's band?
Public Image Limited.
Pill.
They were super progressive because they were trying to do something very different at the time. Very weird time signatures, reggae stuff thrown in there, different instrumentation. The bass playing, Ja Wobble's bass playing was unbelievable. He sat down on stage too.
You could even say the same thing. The Dead Boys, who were like just straight up kind of, raw punk rock. Sid Vader's went on to form Lords of the New Church, and that was kind of that went in that same direction too.
Hold that thought. I would just like to welcome our good friend Brahma Bull to the show.
Welcome,
How's it going?
Good to
Thank
see
you.
Good to see you. I've got a clip for you.
What?
I make that sound all the time.
As a leading member of the Dix division. So how does it feel to be supporting a team in the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs?
Pretty good so far. I mean, I'm having a lot of go between some Blues fans I know and me, but I think we'll take it in 5. So
take them out.
But man, your goalie was good. I mean,
Yeah, he did
I
better than
can't
their
believe
Bruins.
they let him down.
Ottinger was what a magnificent performance for a 23-year-old goalie. Yeah.
It was. He's going to be good for a long time, I think.
It's a shame he was playing with these wooden sticks in front of him that didn't move. These plugs, you know. They just stood in the ice like this.
Look at
like
him go.
like air hockey, you know. They just stood there. But,
Yep.
I'm just happy the Penguins lost.
Well, indeed, everyone's happy about that. But, so you mentioned some great names of bands there, Courtney. I certainly think Public Image Limited are could be seen very much as certainly not a new wave or punk band, but a progressive band. Absolutely, I was big admirer of John Lydon when he switched into Pill, and thought they were great. But you mentioned a few good names there. It's anyone that wants to take their thing forward and do something different with it. Sometimes it works, of course. Sometimes it doesn't work. I mean, there's plenty noodling albums that are by bands that are crap, you know. But at least they had to try. Artistic freedom. So Brahma, my friend, are you a long-standing prog man, or do you just only listen to it when you're drinking?
I listened to everything from the 60s on, so I've got a lot of prog in there. I didn't own albums the same way that a few people on the panel may have. I more had that, list of songs that I liked from the bands that we're all talking about. So don't have the album knowledge as much as individual song type knowledge. But yeah, I was going to ask you, I haven't heard you guys bring this up and I may have missed it, but what do you guys think Styx fits into?
I was going to mention that too.
Yeah, I think they're in that category.
Some definitely strong prog leanings to them, especially early on.
Styx is one of my favorites, but it's one of those guilty pleasure type favorites. They were
just don't
they were
start
cheesy
singing,
good.
Don't start singing "Come Sail Away," or we'll have to all sing it to the end.
Right?
You can't stop.
Speak for yourself.
And you know I'll absolutely do it.
Sorry, Courtney.
She said "Domo arigato."
Domo arigato.
Domo arigato, Mr. Roboto. Yes.
Domo.
I said it under my breath. Sorry.
My
that
wife
was a Prog album.
See, my wife is quite funny because she's not a big fan of any of these bands, and she thinks they're all the same. She's Foreigner. She thinks Mr. Roboto was a Foreigner song, and she thinks Renegade was Foreigner, and she thinks one of theirs is Styx, and another one was Kansas. She doesn't. Oh, it's all the same.
Oh, I get that all the time with my stuff. It's like, oh, it all sounds the same. No,
right.
it doesn't. Listen with your ears.
That's
She
right,
thinks
yeah.
Dennis DeYoung and Tommy Shaw were both in Foreigner.
She does, but she I actually took her to see Foreigner for the first time in the town here before COVID, and she said, "I didn't realize all those songs were Foreigner. That was really good." You didn't know Jukebox Hero was Foreigner? Who did you think it was? Oh, I thought it was Styx or Kansas or
Foreigner is one of those bands though where people I could see that. If you're not like a fan, they did more songs than people realize that they know.
Yeah, and I mean, it's, other than Lou Gramm, who obviously hasn't been in the band for a long time, nobody would really know. I mean, who knows what anybody else in Foreigner looks like? Really,
I don't.
Yeah, I do because
really
I'm a big fan and I've seen them multiple times, but nobody else would. Funnily enough, there's a King Crimson connection because Ian MacDonald, founder member of Foreigner, and he was on the first 4 albums, was in King Crimson. He played the sax stuff. Recently died as well. It's a shame he wasn't that old, but he passed away recently. But so there's a King Crimson connection in Foreigner too. But,
yeah, I saw the Tommy Shaw version of Styx with Yes back in 2011, I think.
Ah, nice.
Yeah,
That'd
no, it
be
was
a
a great
fun
show.
gig. So who was in Yes then? Because there's been about 400 people in Yes. It's like a revolving roundabout of people.
Yeah, they had their new singer at the time. I can't remember his name, but I think most of the members were.
Yeah. And there's 2
Check the
competing
lineup.
versions always out there at the same time. You got the Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe access, and then there's the other lot, whoever they are. The ones that are still alive. There's like 2 different versions. But yes, so yes. And speaking of yes, I want to have another, just briefly, if you'll indulge me. I do want to do another. Is it prog or is it not? So let's fire this up, and I want honest opinions. Here we go. So, the Buggles video killed the radio star. Is it prog or is it not?
Prog.
I'm going to give that one a big no.
Yeah, it's more pop with a little bit of prog to it.
Prog pop.
I was gonna say that's pretty much full blown synth pop, but yeah, there's our progressive elements in it.
Okay, yeah. Any other takers?
Well,
Bit
considering it's
experimental,
music
but
video,
not prog.
that was very progressive.
Yeah.
Oh, no, was it? Yeah, it was.
What was what? Sorry.
Wasn't it the first music video?
It was the first one played on MTV,
MTV.
I believe. So I would. Oh, no, I'm looking at the wrong place. Hang on. I'm listening though. So so we got some no's and some yeses. I'm not hearing a consensus. If you think yes, why would you think it's prog? Well, what makes it prog if you think the answer is yes? Anybody wish to take that one up?
Did any of us say yes?
I did.
I heard somebody. Yeah, Courtney said yes.
Okay.
Anybody else say? Everybody else said no, did they? Let's see what the chat say. See, disaster area is on my wavelength, I have to say. This is a trick question, this one. So
I don't know the connection yet, but
so the connection is there is a prog connection because Trevor Horn and Jeff Downes of the Buggles joined Yes for an album and a tour. So they joined a bona fide progressive band for the album Drama, and then did a world tour with Yes for Drama. And I went to that tour. Trevor Horn was the singer, not John Anderson. Jeff Downes was the keyboard player. And so I think there's a case to be made for the Buggles being bona fide prog. They joined one of the top prog bands for a year. And then Trevor Horn went on to produce Yes with Owner of a Lonely Heart and stuff around that period, and Asia. So I guess.
But odds here theory says that just because the member is a prog musician doesn't mean that the music itself is prog.
Yeah,
if the prog is not in the text, then it's not prog.
Yeah. You see, isn't that being a little hardcore though? Isn't that a little harsh? I don't know.
You said honest opinions.
Okay,
yeah,
well I get it. Yeah, so
that's
I
getting a little close.
I actually think it's not prog, even though those guys did end up. And Jeff Downes has been in Yes or Asia ever since. But
that would kind of be like saying John Anderson from Yes, his Celtic music project would be prog.
Does it make him Scottish? I don't know.
It's good. It's pure Celtic folk music. Like he actually got pub musicians and not actual pros to do it.
Sure.
So it's definitely got.
I think you have a point, Imperatus. Yeah. But funnily enough, I think the consensus appears to be no. So.
And Blackmore's Night would have to be heavy metal.
Well,
by that extension,
if you were from the 17th century, they would be.
That's true.
Fair.
That is fair.
Yo, Yorick, have you seen Thus Blackmore's Night? Yes, they rocketh.
Why does it sound like a Bill and Ted sketch that they never did?
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. They rocketh hard.
They were nerdy enough.
Yeah. I think if you remember last show, I showed Bill Bailey doing the Metallica thing.
Yeah.
With the horns. Bill Bailey does a whole skit on Chaucer. Chaucer and his pals out for a night out in the town and getting drunk and eating kebabs and throwing up, but it's all done in Chaucer language. It's incredible stuff if you ever watch it. It's quite funny. But,
check it out.
In fact, I might show a bit of Bill Bailey and Rick Wakeman later if you're really lucky. So yes, that one has a yes connection, but it isn't prog. So fair enough. I'll give you that one.
So by that definition, we've now ruled that just having synth doesn't automatically make it a prog album or a prog band.
Correct.
Does a concept album automatically make it prog? I had asked earlier in chat.
That's kind of what I brought up with the King Diamond thing.
I don't think it does necessarily.
So I wouldn't say so, because there's a ton of bands out there, like, a lot of the power metal bands and stuff like that mostly do concept albums, and I wouldn't necessarily think that puts them all in the prog category, even though the two genres are related.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, now, so I'll come back to E. Clay Thomason, who's asked about art rock, but the Four Seasons once made a concept album. So that doesn't make them prog, so there's still
Does
Four
it make
Seasons.
that album prog?
Does it make the album prog?
R.
I mean,
Kelly
like-
did an opera.
Like Tommy from The Who, is that a prog album?
Mm-hmm.
I think you could make a case for that for sure, yes.
With
The
Tommy,
Who in
sure.
general, I could see being having at least their later period would be prog.
Does a movie soundtrack count as a concept album?
Oh, geez, now we're getting down a huge rabbit hole. Depends on the movie. So
And it depends on, is the album interconnected or is it just a
Random
movie
songs.
well, they
movie
used
soundtrack?
they used Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells for the Exorcist soundtrack, so yeah, that's prog.
But they also
was-
used for Queen of the Damned a whole bunch of Jonathan Davis written Korn songs, even though they really had no connection to each other. They were just rock songs that were written for the soundtrack, but it is a full album by one man.
That's
But
a
I
great
wouldn't
point.
call that prog.
You make a great point.
He does make a great point. So we'll just end it there.
So another thing too would be
We're done.
would theatrics on stage also make a band prog or not?
If
Like
that's
Alice
the case,
Cooper?
Iron Maiden definitely belongs in that
Well, not
category.
really, because the Tubes, for instance, did a lot of theatrics on stage, but it doesn't make them prog. They were more
When
new
I
wave.
saw the Tubes, they did not. I was very disappointed. But then again, it was very late. It was way later, and it was at a barbecue rib festival, and they played with Flock Eagles, who were not with the hair and everything. They were in flannel shirts.
Yeah, and I almost had them when we did our punk special. I was almost going to talk about them, but we ran out of time. But the Tubes were an interesting band. Almost like they adopted punk rather than they were punk. But certainly had some interest. Like White Punks on Dope. That's a great record. So the good
a great
question from
time.
yeah, exactly. Good question from E. Clay Thomason. Thank you for being here in the chat, E. Clay. Appreciate it very much. Explain the difference between prog rock and art rock. I'm not sure I can explain it, but whenever I hear the phrase art rock, the first band that springs to mind for me is Roxy Music.
I was just going to say that.
Immediately it springs into my
Yeah.
mind. I might not be able to define it, but that's who springs to mind. But there may be other
They're
examples.
they're kind of related. I don't know.
When I hear the art rock designation, I always immediately think to the really hipster bands that everyone pretends to like before they were cool. Because it just seems like really, even more pretentious than the normal prog.
Yeah.
And to
Those would
me,
be the upper middle class kids would be into art rock. As I was talking about the class structure in rock earlier, it's and then the university ones are into prog. The upper middle class are art rock.
I was rapping earlier when you were talking about like the competition of what they're gonna play in this mode or like this time signature and whatnot, because it just made me think of Dream Theater, and Dream Theater is a bunch of dudes that went to Berklee College of Music. And I was just saying, I went to school with so many people like that were just trying to do something to like show off how much it's just like the ultimate music nerddom.
Yeah. So Courtney, actually, it's funny you say that. I was just thinking a couple days ago about that. Would you say that prog rock is rock music for band nerds?
Yes, it's nerd
Certainly
rock.
music
It
nerd.
really is nerd rock. It's like, yeah.
I think Disaster Area's got a great take on this because I love the Wombles. And I'm going to sing
I
the
got
theme song
chanted
right now.
tonight.
Underground, overground, wombling free. Yeah, no.
And as a follow-up question, 70s, would you consider any rock band with a flute prog rock?
I would consider almost every band with a flute prog rock. And it depends where they're playing the flute, which orifice they're playing the flute from, I think, is usually the deciding factor.
What happens at band camp stays at band camp.
It does. So, Brahma, I think you were going to say something earlier, but you
we moved on, and I don't.
we moved
art
on
rock.
already. Yes.
Art rock to me, it's a more, I guess in my head, a more modern concept of it would be like the operatic metal, you know, where you got a rock band or a metal band and you have a fully trained opera singer. So it may be a different definition than what you guys are really looking at.
I would call that symphonic metal, which that's usually a hallmark of those bands, is they have like usually a very epic sound, but they usually do have trained opera singers as their lead.
Yeah.
I think of art rock as being more avant-garde and experimental, like
too.
Velvet
That's
Underground.
Okay.
Velvet Underground sprang to mind for me too. Yeah, that's definitely art rock, and certainly with their association with Warhol. I mean, heavily associated with him. They were on that scene. That's arty, not necessarily
How I feel
progressive.
about Tangerine Dream.
Yeah, Tangerine Dream or Prog.
They're just
very
pretentious
synthy
to
prog.
me, but
There's a bold statement, like Can and bands like that. Even Kraftwerk, I consider to be a pretty proggy band. That's the electronic side of prog. I'm just going to add to the stream. So this, Imperatus, you shared this. Sorry for not getting up there till now, but I'm juggling.
that's that album cover I was talking about, the Isaac Asimov metal.
Right, Worlds and Worlds. I'm going to have to.
Oh,
Excuse me while I make a note.
I'll shoot you a couple of links later.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Because I'm a big Asimov man, big science fiction
fan. And
so.
as far as I know, it's one, maybe two guys that sprang out of a proto black metal band in At the Gates.
Oh,
okay.
At the Gates
are great.
Yeah.
So
they're
lyrically,
they're still around in some form.
Yeah, but would they fall into like a little bit of the prog metal?
Yeah, it's like that proggy thrash meets black metal kind of deal.
Yeah, I didn't think about
Very
that.
influential band.
So, would you is the lyrical content based around specific books or?
I think it's more
founding?
themes, because they do get into talking about, you know, AI a little bit and robots, as far as like the rules that Asimov put in place for robots and things like that. Because one of their tracks, if I correct on the lyrics, it's a song called Usurpers, and it's pretty much either AI or robots taking a planet over, or aliens coming in and doing it.
Right. Okay. I like the sound of this because that's one of the things that got me into Rush and some of the stuff was the fact that it was very spacey.
Yeah.
Very science fiction-y. I mean, I like that stuff. I was into science fiction and that attracted me heavily.
You also had in my scene, I'm not sure if Darius or Pope know about it, but one of the members of Dark Throne has a space synth project.
Yep.
Called Neptune Towers.
Yes, sir.
And it's really, really, really kind of out there. Not one of my preferred things, but it does exist.
Yeah, it's one of those interesting things. Like, you know, it's kind of way out there, and especially lyrical content. It's kind of
there's no lyrics for it. It's straight spacescapes.
I might be thinking of something different. Oh no, I'm thinking of fucking Glory Hammer. Never mind. which is the most ridiculous lyrics you've ever heard, especially you 70s as a Scotsman will absolutely adore it. I believe one of their bigger tracks is the Unicorn Invasion of Dundee.
Dundee, actually, that's not realistic because no one would invade Dundee. They would flee from Dundee.
This is fair.
We're going in a different direction. So I'm definitely going to give this a listen, Empiritus. Thank you for.
Yeah, I believe they have 2 albums out. They didn't really last all that long. They didn't really catch. You know, I think it was pretty much just meant to be like a fun project because most of the original members from At the Gates, including this guy, went on to do other bands.
Okay, but no, I'm definitely into that. I want to hear that. So Toxic Manflu, who is just a real pest and just darkens everyone's day wherever he goes, and he's, you know, just kidding, buddy. You know I love you, in the carnal sense as well. I'm going to have to. There we go. He's asking one of the key questions, or he's not asking, he's positing so Jethro Tull is neither heavy or metal. Discuss amongst yourselves. So are we getting any Tull fans on the panel?
Oh, I'm one. for
right.
sure.
So, what is your view of this question? Are they
Heavy yes, metal no.
Heavy yes,
I would
metal?
say that they certainly have a couple songs that could be considered heavy metal. Songs like Aqualung or Locomotive Breath, I would put up there. But overall, yeah, I would not say that they're metal. I'd say they're prog.
They have made a couple of albums, and I'm struggling to. I remember the one particular where they were standing in front of a bunch of radar towers in the 80s that were quite metal. I wish I could remember the name of that album, but they did do a couple in the 80s and 90s that were a bit more hard rock, metallic edged, a bit less of the codpiece and flute. So I think they've got leanings that way.
Leanings. Yeah, I consider them fully a prog rock band. I can't really think of any song that I consider to cross that line into metal. They certainly have some heavy riffs like Aqualung, but I still feel like that's hard rock. And then if you look at Thick as a Brick, that is extremely proggy.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't this going back, though, to a little bit to the just because someone joins a prog band doesn't mean they're prog? Because Tony Iommi was in Jethro Tull for 5 minutes. So maybe that does make them metal.
I think prog rock is one of the most confusing genres. If you really want to,
it's like we're sort of heavy metal, but sort of not, but sort of synth, but sort of not.
Well, the
but they're folk and they're psychedelic, but not.
Do you feel maybe the problem with this genre and a certain other genres is it's very easy to say who is in it, but when you get to the borderline, it's extremely difficult.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because you start drawing the lines really finely between who's prog rock and who's straight up on the other side of the line as like a synth pop or heavy metal band.
Yeah, and I think ultimately,
like Rainbow, you can kind of make an argument either way as to whether they're prog or not.
Well, they certainly had some lyrically. You were right. I mean, the material that Rainbow did, Man in the Silver Mountain and Kill the King, and that era of Rainbow, they became very poppy later with the Russ Ballard stuff that they recorded, and Since You've Been Gone, whatever. That was progressive in many ways. I mean, it was lyrically progressive, musically. Ritchie Blackmore was trying to introduce medieval sounds, and he obviously went full that way later. He went full on medieval. Is that way you could put it? He went medieval on him, and I think there was an element of that in the band. But then again, they had just so much rock and metal in them, especially with Dio singing that.
Yeah, but after the Dio period, they had a song. I can't think of the name. You might remember. It was just very much a pop rock song.
Well, Since You've Been Gone, the Graham Bonnet era.
So is that the one with the video with the blonde girl?
Too.
Yeah, Since You've Been Gone, and I Know I Surrender, which was Tony Joe White or whatever his name was, I can't remember. So they became very radio friendly, MTV friendly, poppy. I do love Down to Earth, the Graham Bonnet album. That was their last really good album, I'd say. But
and Graham Bonnet certainly went on to do great things with Alcatraz.
Oh yeah, he's a good singer, really good singer. But it's funny because he wouldn't fit the mold visually, which annoys Ritchie Blackmore to this day. he wanted him to grow his hair long, and he did, and then he cut it before the tour, and Ritchie Blackmore went nuts. He said, "We're a metal band, you got to have long hair." And he comes up with a suit on.
One definite prog rock artist that we have not mentioned at all, and I'm kind of surprised, is Thin Lizzy.
Well, you see, I've always seen Thin Lizzy in more of a metal hard rock band than a prog band.
No, I can see both sides of it. Like their early stuff, I think, is very much more prog.
Ah, right. So you're going right back to the first 4 albums, yeah, Johnny the Fox and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I get that. Yeah, I can see that. It's the same way that the first few Judas Priest albums are not really that defined as metal. They've got a lot of different stuff on there. Before
in fact,
they really...
you could easily mistake something like Dreamer Deceiver or something like that for a prog song.
Yeah, a lot of the band, there's the same with UFO. I mean, they started in the 1960s. It was a long time before they became a full-on hard rock metal band. They had a lot of progressive and psychedelic stuff early. But I mean, the genre thing, as I said earlier, we're talking about genres for fun here. It's hard to pigeonhole people too much, but we're just having some fun. I mean, it's probably a horrible thing to pigeonhole people. If you said to certain acts, "Oh, you're prog," they'd go, "What?" Horrified. How dare you pigeonhole me?
We're not that nerdy.
Yeah. Well, I was saying, in terms of art rock, David Bowie was mentioned earlier, but Bowie, I mean, we could do 10 shows on Bowie, but he he could be seen as progressive in many ways too. You know, I mean, he was doing a lot of different stuff in a lot of different ways, and that's probably a definition of a progressive artist.
I'd say Space Oddity definitely counts as more on a proggy end. That Starman, like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know who played keyboards on Space Oddity? Rick Wakeman.
Oh, really?
So there
Did
you
not
go.
know that.
Yeah. Well, one of the session men that played keyboards in it. Because I know Elton John did some stuff for him too early on. Because Elton was a session man long before he became a solo star. But,
it's just
So
really
Ziggy
hard to
Stardust?
separate Bowie from glam rock.
Right. I was gonna say, so is Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars progressive glam?
Yeah.
oh God, we've
I'd
just
put it-
invented a new genre.
Yeah.
I mean, the Sweet did concept albums, so maybe they're progressive glam too. I'll just throw that out there.
Well, I would say it's not even just that it's a concept album, but the way that it progresses, right? It has that variation, you know, the variation in the music itself that tells a story.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Well, there
Bowie
was
was
that,
certainly doing very, very different things with music at the time, and throughout his whole career, really.
I would just like to condemn Toxic Man Flu for throwing us off track by talking about Jethro Tull, so don't ever do that again. Early Lizzie, yeah, Disaster Area, you've been really on point today, and Early Lizzie had lots of Irish folk influences. Absolutely they did. And I've actually seen original Lizzie guitarist Eric Bell with his own band years ago playing live, and he had a lot of the Celtic stuff in that act. Blues too, but he had a lot of Celtic stuff. Very good. He was very good indeed. Looked a bit frail. I'm not sure he's even still with us, but he was the original guy on Whiskey in the Jar and all that stuff. So before they ended up Gary Moore and Brian Robertson and then Downey. But,
I still thought that was one of the weirdest things ever that Brian Robertson ended up in Motorhead somehow.
I know, I never got that really. I thought Brian Robertson's a great guitar player, but he's much more Lizzie than he is Motorhead.
Yeah, I mean, he just did not fit in at all, and the fans fucking responded to it pretty similar. That's why he was only on the one record.
Plus, he was an enormous drunk, but
Not
really
bad,
bad, even for
Motorhead.
Well, Brian Robertson actually, as well as being a Lizzie, played guitar for Frankie Miller, one of my favourite Scottish singers. Really great guy, great singer in the 70s and 80s. Unfortunately suffered a stroke and couldn't even speak after that. But Brian Robertson played guitar for him for many years. And if you ever hear Frankie Miller stuff, it's really good bluesy, rough bluesy vocals. Brilliant. But Rod Stewart used to be in awe of Frankie Miller, let's put it that way. He said, I'll never measure up to a guy like that as a singer. So there was a comment here from, again, Disaster Area. Who knows? We'll have to get you on here, Disaster Area. They used to do these cover albums in the UK for the they were called Top of the Pops, and there was the TV show Top of the Pops where he had all the chart hits. They did these albums they'd put out, Top of the Pops, and it would have 20 hits from the last month. They weren't the real songs, they were cover versions. So they were like 99 pence and they were cheap, but it wasn't the real stuff. But Elton John used to play in a lot of those, doing other people's stuff. So people it was like Hallmark or something. You were fooled into buying this shit thinking it was the real thing, and it wasn't. It was like, that doesn't sound like Donny Osmond to me. Good God, you know. But Elton would play in those.
That's a good thing.
But they probably got like £5 for doing each one or something. It would be nothing. It would be shit money, but.
Can I ask you a question? It's sort of a follow-up to the central question of what is prog. Yeah. So, if it's progressive, what is it that is being progressed?
Over to you guys.
Well, I'd say they're experimenting and progressing, you know, what can be done in the rock genre as far as musicality and in terms of lyricism. Like, they're really just pushing the boundaries of what you can do with the music style and have it work.
Sorry, I just had to show you the cover of one of these Top of the Pops albums. There was a reason that people bought them.
Can't imagine what it would be.
I don't know what it is, but giant pin-up calendar free inside. I had a few of these because they were cheap, you know.
Wow, but leopard print in '74. Britain was ahead of the time.
Indeed, all these were session guys like Elton John playing on them. Hell, Jimmy Page probably played on them. He played on everything too.
Can you guys hear me? Sorry.
Yep.
Hello?
Yep.
Okay, good. Every time you say Top of the Pops, I think of the Rosillos.
Well, that's what that song is basically based on that phrase of the show, the title of the show. Yeah. I love that song, by the way. Good Scottish band.
I love that song too.
Yeah. So anyway, that's why that's Elton John had a lot to do with these. I don't think he particularly enjoyed the covers himself, though. So.
My Ding-a-ling.
My Ding-a-ling. That's Chuck Berry's biggest hit in years. My Ding-a-ling. Have you ever heard that one?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh, it's terrible.
Well,
Look
the
at
one before that
tracks.
was kind of funny because it had an Elton John song on it.
Oh, it did. So
Don't Go
Elton,
Breaking My Heart.
he
Yeah.
probably wasn't doing that by '76, so he did the earlier
Yeah.
ones. So Elton, we'd like you to cover your own song for this.
And can you
This
do
album.
both parts of the duet, please?
That's right. Anyway, that was the Top of the Pops albums, which were insanely popular, but they were not the real shit. Where were we? Sorry. Yes.
Oh,
What makes
what is
something
being
Prog?
progressed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just think it means that you're trying to take the musical format that you're in and trying to do something new or different with it. And like, okay, so we, instead of me playing this in 4/4 time, let's do it in 8/6/8 time and make it something different. No,
I think-
that could just turn out to be shite, but it could be
6/8 is way too common. You have to go to like 5/4 or 7/8 or
5/4.
something like
Yeah,
that.
or like Meshuggah, go like 13/8.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Sugar has some really interesting time signatures in there.
Good way to break a drummer's wrist.
I don't know. I mean, I think E. Clay's got a good comment, which is it's anti-pop, and he could be right. It's the opposite of pop, and that could be a good or a bad thing. But there's good, bad in every genre. There's good and bad.
Yeah, but sometimes they do produce pop hits.
By accident.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they do. That
Well,
has
that goes
been-
back to the nerd thing too. I think of the
Right,
opposite
yeah.
of popular as nerd.
Rock for band nerds. What I think of as being progressed is the songs themselves. Sometimes like the whole album, which would be a concept album, but within a song, the song changes. It progresses in order to tell the story or communicate a feeling, as opposed to like a single riff carrying the entire song. And so yeah, it's definitely progressive in terms of like experimenting with genre, experimenting with technology. But I think of it as the song structure,
Yeah, and I
primarily
think that-
as being progressive.
generally speaking, extended pieces with multiple sections within them, sometimes with different structure and time signature, or even different styles. That's
sometimes.
very-
Sometimes getting away from the.
Go on.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I was just gonna say, so would you consider Bohemian Rhapsody?
It's
Yeah.
proggy. Very
That's
Oh, yeah.
okay. I don't know if you had talked about it before, but okay.
It's,
No, no, no,
That's
yeah,
Prog
yeah.
in pretty much every dimension.
Yeah. Brahma, you were.
Well, I'd say one of the definitions that I use and have seen used is, going away from just the basic 3-piece or 4-piece band to, adding in other instruments, the synth, or even symphonic elements, but not just for the sake of adding them, but because it adds to that music.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah, I mean it's like
Progressing
all
the
these things.
genre.
Yeah, it's slippery to pin down, but there are elements like you've just described. There are elements that fit it. Goodbye, Lord Thoth. Thanks for dropping by, buddy. Good to see you. buddy.
Later, LT.
Yeah, later.
So in the case of ELP, though, they actually subtracted an instrument, right? They had no guitar.
That's right, and
No
it's
electric
funny because they said at the time, "Well, we can't find a guitarist that'll play with us. There isn't any." Well, there was probably a shed load of them, but I think Keith Emerson was too. He didn't want to share the stage with the guitar player, so it was an ego thing. But they had colossal egos. But that's what kind of put me off ELP a little bit. Is I like a guitar in there somewhere, unless I'm listening to truly electronic stuff like Kraftwerk. Then I don't mind at all. But then I know what to expect. I guess it's an expectation things. Just Toxic Manflu was talking about his ding-a-ling. He may love it. Nobody else loves your ding-a-ling, Toxic. I have to say. But Hale Grant.
Imagine Mrs. Flu.
Definitely
Mrs.
not
Flu
Mrs.
might like
Flu.
it. She did say to me last
She's
night she
married
wasn't
to him
that
after
keen.
all.
She said to me last night she wasn't that keen on it, but
She tolerates it at best.
Yes, exactly. If she can find it. But, you know. But we have, Mr. Grant Gregory is with us. Sentient Dildo, obviously. The chat is great. You're all doing really well. I'm sorry I can't keep up so much. Legalize adulthood. Hello, my friend. We do want to get you on here again soon. And as I was saying earlier, we're going to do a Who To special. And you and I are planning to do something on a Scottish band, Big Country. So, which Courtney may want to join too. Of course, there might just be the three of us on that one. We'll know. We'll see. It won't be one of these. It'll be a one-off, spin-off. But, although I do want to do a Scottish rock edition of this one, which might be fun. But yeah, lots of great people in the chat. Thanks for all your contributions. I think we've got time for one more. We've got time for lots more, but one more. Is it prog or is it not? I have one more up my sleeve. This one I think may be, in my opinion, the ultimate prog record ever made, but we'll see if you guys agree. It's very British centric, of course, so you guys will not have a clue what this is, but hey, I'm going to go for it. So.
Jogging everywhere, up and down and around the town, hurrah for the Cornish Floral Dance.
The great Terry Wogan, British star, presenter, and I think there's a case to be made this is prog. First of all, it features non-standard rock instruments, the brass band. He's doing his best Morrissey impression, throwing some flowers around the stage. It's an existential piece about life in Cornwall. So I think there's a good case to be made for this is prog. Anybody else?
Sounds like a
Greg,
show
Gregory
tune to
knows who
me.
I'm talking about.
You just made me think of the
I'm gonna
hamburger
pass on
song
this
that
one.
Morrissey did. I'm sorry, you just made me laugh.
So we're getting some feedback from somebody. I don't know if it's somebody's mic or something. It's gone.
That was me.
Sure.
It could be me. Hold on, let's see.
Well, it's definitely not Imperatus.
For
His
once.
ring isn't moving.
So I want a critical analysis of that piece of music. You only heard a bit of it. The whole thing is pretty similar, though. I think that's possibly one of the prog masterpieces of history.
Sounds like a show tune to me.
Yeah, give
Yeah,
Pat
I'm
Sajak
very
a
on this
backing
one,
band.
Yeah, seriously.
Okay, well, I think I'm hearing from the chat, disaster area is saying that's definitely not prog at all.
He was dramatic.
That one wasn't a trick one. It was genuinely a crap record that I was trying to put forward.
I think we need to listen to the whole 12.5-minute song.
Well, this is it. There is a
Prog.
28-minute remix of it produced by Trevor Horn, featuring Rick Wakeman on keyboards. So I think that's the one we need to hear.
Mm.
And that one only exists in my head. So
Which is where it should stay.
that's where it should stay. So I think we're a resounding no on that one. So that was it for the It's Prog or Not Prog. I only had 4 because it took me ages to do those 4. Editing video into the middle of the night just to get those clips. But I had about 4 others I was going to do, and I gave up in the end. It was like 1 a.m. I thought, screw this. So I'm not giving you all. I'm not giving you my all, fans. I'm sorry. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed those ones. That was quite a neat idea. We might do more of those. Yeah. Is it or not? But I'll just give one more play of my logo. I do enjoy that. I was very proud of
I like it.
It's a great typeface.
Yeah, that's actually the Roger Dean typeface. I found it online, downloaded it. I'm using it for that. So while we're on the subject of silly prog things, I did have a couple more to talk about. Things that contributed towards the end of prog as a real live thing. First of all was the Rick Wakeman scenario. Now I love Rick Wakeman. He's the opposite of all progsters. They were all upper class guys. He's a working class guy, a real bloke, likes his beer, good lad. But he did contribute to some of the finest moments in prog, and one of them was, and hopefully everybody can see this. I might have to expand it a bit. there was the famous incident where Rick Wakeman ordered a curry and had it delivered onto the stage and started eating it on his keyboards during a particularly long noodly bit of some Yes song. So it was the order Rick Wakeman remembers was for chicken vindaloo, rice pilau, 6 papadums, a bindi bahi, a bamboo aloy, and a stuffed paratha in November 1973. And he also said he was the only carnivore in the band. So the chicken was one. Not only did the curry annoy the rest of the band, but the chicken annoyed them a lot too. And he was on stage at the Manchester Free Trade Hall, and they're doing Tales from Topographic Oceans, which is like 6 hours long. The album consisted of 4 songs that rolled gently together over 4 sides of vinyl for 83 minutes. There were a couple of pieces where I hadn't got much to do, Wakeman would recall, and it was a bit dull. Now, imagine how the fans feel if they're sitting out in the crowd. During every show, a keyboard tech reclined underneath Wakeman's Hammond organ, ready to fix broken hammers or ribbons, and to continually hand me alcoholic beverages. That night in Manchester, the tech asked the bored Wakeman what he wanted to eat after the show. Wakeman, the lone carnivore in Yes, ordered the curry. Half the audience were in a narcotic rapture on some far-off planet, Wakeman wrote in his 2007 memoir, and the other half were asleep, bored, shitless. It's not very complimentary to his own band. Wakeman kept on at the keyboards, etc., etc. And then around 30 minutes later, his tech started handing up little foil trays of curry, and Wakeman began placing them on top of his keyboards. I still didn't have a lot to do, so I thought I might as well tuck in. The food was obscured by the instrument stacks and further obscured by Wakeman's cape, but the aroma danced over to Yes's lead singer, John Anderson. He took a good look at the culinary insult, shrugged, and then papadum in hand, he returned to his microphone to sing his next part. So I've read other accounts of this where they said that the rest of the band were not very happy, and it caused some stress and led eventually to Wakeman departing the band. But basically, he was obviously not really having much of a good time by then. And
a little disrespectful.
I was waiting for you to say that he barfed or something.
He maybe did later, but I remember him saying that he would be very alone in the band often because the others were all the kind of upper class guys and he was just the working class boy, and they were also like Wakeman and Howe and Squire, and even John Anderson plays the guitar too. All the guitarists, he said, were always in a huddle doing stuff, and he was kind of left out. But anyway, this is a famous event in rock. He decided to eat his curry on stage. So.
But he has received a CBE.
Indeed.
Maybe you can tell me what CBE is?
It's a curry of the British Empire, yes. Because we all know the best Indian food is made in Britain.
I was surprised by how big Indian food was when I was in London.
Yeah,
the McDonald's there, they had a McCurry. A McCurry. Ooh. I thought that was so interesting. I didn't try it. I was afraid.
Is that like a normal curry but made with horse meat?
It was like a McCurry sandwich. Yeah, that was funny actually.
So it may not be the best curry you ever had, but it might be the best thing you've ever had at McDonald's.
True.
They have weird different things at different McDonald's around the world.
They do. Sometimes they even have food, but not always.
They had pizza with egg on it in Paris.
If it's not deep fried pizza, it's not worthwhile.
Oh, as far as that behavior you just mentioned, I don't think I would consider that prog behavior, but it's definitely rock star behavior.
It's rock star behavior, not prog behavior. So the other thing that Rick Wakeman did, is he did these shows on ice. Well, that sounded good. That was a really proggy chord in the background.
It was.
So he did these albums like The Wives of King Henry VIII and ended up doing them, the shows on ice. So if I can find it. So the Rick Wakeman, The Myths and Legends of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. And I've seen him do this live. There was no ice show, but they actually had a bunch of people ice skating the parts in front of him. I don't want to play the video.
Okay, that is kind of prog.
This is amazing.
So the band are there, the ice rink is in front of them, and the crowd are behind that. And it was apparently quite the thing. I'm trying to find another picture because there's not that many great pictures of it, but there's one of a girl dancing. But they had there was guys with horses, ice skaters with horse costumes on them going around and jousting and stuff. And despite one ignominious incident when his cape got trapped in an elevated synth. It sounds like he had a lot of fun, but a lot of girls skating around wearing stockings and suspenders. And he says, I don't remember stockings and suspenders.
I can imagine.
Yeah, he says, I don't recall.
My cape got stuck in my synth.
That's right, my cape got stuck in my synth. He says, I don't recall stockings and suspenders coming into Arthurian legend, but hey, it does now, you know. And I'm sure that if you look up, you can see these videos on YouTube. They've got guys in the horse costumes and everything. But it's just this was in the insanity of Prog. But Rick's such a good lad. I can't fault him for it. You know, he's such a good guy. Look at that. I mean, he's like a guru of Prog.
So is this the reason that parents are tortured by Barney on Ice and the Wiggles on Ice and all the other on Ice now? Wakeman the cause of that?
You can blame Rick Wakeman for all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the fault of Ice Capades firmly lies at his feet.
Yes, indeed. So Rick Wakeman on Ice. He wasn't on Ice. The band didn't go on Ice. Just the
in the Just World, that's how you get sent to The Hague.
That's right. But I actually have one little other clip of Rick, if you don't mind indulging me, and I gotta just stop that screen. Then I'll have to reshare so I can get the audio. And I'm only going to play a little bit of this in case any of them. So Rick Wakeman used to regularly appear on a British show called Nevermind the Buzzcocks, and he and Bill Bailey, who I showed last week, did stuff. I'm just going to show a tiny little clip of this, so forgive me if. But this is the kind of funny stuff that he gets up to.
Rick, what? Was that in your loft? Don't tell me you kept it in the same wardrobe all these years. I'm thinking, one of these days.
Oh, I thought it'd come in useful one day.
Must have been great being this kid's though. Dad, you got any clothes in the loft we can muck about in? So, Sean, Naz and Frank, here are your three.
It's London Calling, I think.
Yeah, it is.
I just found that him and Bill Bailey are hilarious together. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Anyway, that's Rick Wakeman for you. A gentleman and a scholar.
I love the look on the audience too of just like, what the hell am I watching?
Exactly. Oh my God, you know. But Mr. Grant Gregg says Bill Bailey is a fucking treasure, and he is. He's one of the funniest guys in the comedy, and there's a lot of musical comedy. So that was my Rick Wakeman stuff. I hope you all enjoyed that. He's a good lad. Oh, here's the one. No, this is. Sorry, I missed one picture.
I'm going to sign off really quick because I'm going to echo. I don't have headphones that work anymore.
Right.
Can anyone hear
Okay,
me?
lass. Are you coming back though? We'll see you in a few minutes.
If they charge again, but I tried and it didn't really work. So if not, bye and thank you, but I'll be in the chat.
Thank you for joining us, lass, and
Lovely to have you, Courtney.
Always good to see you.
Cheers. Thank you. So I got one more. Just I found these pictures. This is the ice. You can see the guys with the horse outfits on, and there's that dancing girl again. And there's the stage with the ice rink in front of it. So a fairly restrained production, I would say.
Medieval times meets Ice Capades.
That's right. Meets progressive rock. Meets come on punk rock. Hurry up and get here. Oops. Forgive me for looking at Vanity Fair, which is usually trash, but there he is in his glory. So there we have it, Rick Wakeman, and I have seen him live doing that stuff, but no ice rink. So that was a shame. No ice rink. So anyway,
I'm betting the record companies weren't too happy about all this either because they had to pay for half of this shit.
Well, the thing is, do they pay for it or do they make the artist pay for it?
Well, I mean, usually I think the artist is the one who pays for a lot of the stage show.
Yeah, because the record company will say, yeah, of course you can have 20 ice skaters and an ice rink and an orchestra. Yeah, do it, no problem. And then behind the scenes are going £500,000 charged to the artist, 10% interest. Anywho, so
Now they're saying I'm echoing.
no.
Oh, that was just while the screen share was on.
Okay.
Any of us would have echoed except for him.
Indeed. So I guess it's probably time then for me to reveal my top 5 favorite prog songs, and then you guys can rip the shit out of them. And let's see if the chat agrees with these. And I've tried to go for, I haven't picked the like things that were like album wide. I could have said Mike Oldfield, Tubular Bells, but that's the whole album. I'm just going for individual compositions, and these are not songs because it's prog; they're compositions. So all I have to do now is figure out where the hell I put that video, and we will play that. So talk amongst yourselves while I manipulate.
Are we sticking in the 70s for these picks for you?
Yeah, I'm going to stick to the old stuff. And then you guys can give me your favorites because I'd like to hear those. So let me just...
Was that a euphemism?
Indeed. I am finding it now. I'm just going to pause it before it gets started. Okay, share screen. We're going to do the old... I didn't upload this one to StreamYard, so I'm having to do it offline. It's a little bit complicated. Share screen.
I love that we're all being silent after you said talk amongst yourselves.
I know. I'm carrying this whole damn show myself.
Well, he just kept talking.
This is how the sausage is made, folks.
Well, here's a quick question. I mean, because I've noticed over the years of the various different genres of music that I've listened to that certain styles have originated in I'm echoing now.
Oh, it's because I've shared the audio.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Certain styles of music originated in certain areas. Like you were saying earlier, Prog originated mostly in the UK, Canada, and a little bit in the US. But then you had, that new wave of British heavy metal exclusively coming out of the UK. The second wave of black metal exclusively coming out of Scandinavia.
Yeah,
it's
grunge is a very American grunge.
That came mostly out of the Pacific Northwest. Yeah. It's kind of funny how certain geographical locations breed certain styles of music.
I think so, and I think the some of these, as you say, are very British. Prog was a very British thing to start with, just as punk. I know there was the American flavor of punk in New York and in California, but to me it was a very British movement to start with, and a lot of it was recycling of American stuff, but putting it back out as their own thing. And that's why there's less prog acts in my list from America than there are from Britain. I mean, I'd written a bunch out down here. Obviously, we had Rush, we're Canadian. I'd written Kansas. I'd written Todd Rundgren and Utopia. I mean, that's a very big prog. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of prog albums that they did.
Is that because British people are nerdier?
I don't know. I don't know what it is. I've never. Maybe it's more of a classical thing because there's more classical influence. But yeah, a lot of these bands were British. Just as like a lot of the early metal bands were British. I don't know why that is. Maybe we've got nothing else to do. I don't know. I think it's just because the weather's so shit. We have to stay indoors a lot. So we've got
might explain the Scandinavian thing too.
Well, it's possible in Puritas. Yeah, I mean, it does actually have a factor. There's a factor in that. I mean, Burton Cummings and Randy Bachman of Guess Who, and then Bachman Turner Overdrive. They were always saying they grew up in Winnipeg in Canada, in Manitoba. And it's frickin' freezing there for 4 or 5 months of the year.
A lot of the Scandinavian bands said that in interviews that the oppressive weather and climate of Scandinavia definitely led to what they were doing musically. Being getting dark at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, if you're lucky.
And yet death metal came out of Florida.
Yeah. Yeah, that is weird, isn't it? Yeah. But then again, it's hot and sweaty there in the summer, so you want to stay inside in air conditioning. So
there's also a massive difference between multiple genres, just East Coast and West Coast of the States.
Yeah.
Be it hip hop, be it old thrash metal scene. East Coast stuff was more like Anthrax and had more of a punk and hardcore feel. Then you had stuff coming out of the Bay Area, which had a completely different sound.
Yeah, the Randy Bachman thing is, he did a song called Prairie Town about growing up in the prairies in Canada, and he said the lyric in the line is it's 40 below, like 40 centigrade below, not in, 40 centigrade, 40 below. We'll stay inside and rock and roll. They basically sat in their basements for 6 months playing guitars. So I guess there is a environmental factor in some of these things.
Kind of makes me wonder whether more bands would want.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's rock and roll is universal, I think, these days, but I think it definitely, and more regionalization as well. Then, I mean, even in the early 70s, there wasn't a lot of cross pollination. It's not like you could go on the internet and talk to someone over in North America, So scenes did grow up on their own in different places. But why prog was such a British thing, and it was, I don't know. It's a cultural thing, I guess, from British influences, classical, folk music influences, the Tolkien stuff that played a large part lyrically. But then again, when you look at the space influence stuff, that could be anybody. That could have been from any country. More likely to be North America than Britain, but I don't know. It's interesting, but let's have a quick look at my carefully put together top 5 favorite prog compositions, and hopefully you can hear this. Let me know if you can't. I'll be hitting the pause button occasionally.
Yeah, I can hear it.
You can't? Could you hear anything?
Nope.
Then I will stop. Forgive me, for I have sinned. Remove.
Now we can vamp while you're trying to pull it up.
That's right. This is why I need Toxic to be my producer.
Okay. So here's a vamp question then. So we were talking about adding in other instruments, not just for the sake of adding the other instruments, but to add the music. Now we're going to echo again.
No. Oh, we're echoing it, or it must be the audio is working then. Sorry.
Try it.
We'll come back to what you were saying there, but I'll play this just now. Can you hear that?
No, sir.
Nope.
No audio. Okay. Forget it. We'll go back to what you were saying, and I'll do something else.
Well,
sorry, everybody. Toxic, we need your production skills in here. I'll remove that screen. Carry on, Brahma Bull.
Well, I was just for a vamp question. I was going to ask. So, does Metallica's S&M count as a prog album?
Well,
I would say no.
It is a full-on symphony. So,
and it complements the 4-piece band.
Oh, it does.
Rather than
S&M was a whole nother level for them. And they did some pretty interesting original pieces for that record too, like No Leaf
Clover. What do you think?
I would say Master of Puppets is more progressive than S&M.
And Justice for All too, maybe.
And Justice for All, yeah.
What do you mean by S&M?
It's the symphonic album that they did.
Oh, with, no, I would agree.
San Francisco
Master of
Orchestra
Puppets is more progressive, but just because they add a symphony to something doesn't make it prog. Dimmu Borgir, a Norwegian shitty black metal band,
hell yeah,
did a stage show with a full orchestra and they still sucked. So
I love Dimmu though.
I only like their first 2 albums.
Man, the best one was Insorte Diaboli. But I don't think adding a symphony or classical instruments makes it prog. It makes it symphonic rock, but not all symphonic rock is progressive.
That's why I asked, because kind of what we were going back to earlier. Does a concept album automatically make it prog? Does adding a symphony automatically make it prog? So I think we're all decided on no, there's no such thing as an automatic prog album.
You can do a concept album without being progressive. It's basically just songs around a theme. But certainly concept albums, they go well with prog rock.
Yeah,
I think Master of Puppets, even just the song Master of Puppets, is very prog because it goes through all those changes, right? You have that whole instrumental interlude 3/4 of the way through the song, and like you said, a lot of stuff on And Justice for All.
Yeah, especially at Justice itself. It's 9 minutes long. It's got like 3 different sections to it. And how they completely got rid of the bass.
Right. So we think And Justice for All and Masters of Puppets could actually be considered prog albums then? Or
Prog-y.
just have elements?
Prog-ier than their
Yeah, I would say elements.
But would someone that
I do.
adored prog, such as Floyd and Genesis and Yes from that era, also adore and consider those albums prog too? They might adore them, but would they consider them prog as well? I don't know.
Do they consider themselves prog?
They might do.
Because bands don't always apply those genre labels to themselves.
Progressive isn't always a dirty word, you know.
Just usually.
No.
Lemmy didn't even consider Motorhead a heavy metal band.
No, he said they were rock and roll, and in a lot of ways they were, just really, really fucking loud.
Yeah.
Right, I'm going to give us another try. So we have the technology, or maybe we don't, but we'll give it a try.
We can rebuild it.
Also, you can see how shitty my taste in music is. So.
The path is clear, though no eyes can see. The course laid down long before.
Well, I was supposed to be able to talk during the pauses, but of course I had to play it on StreamYard, so I don't know how to do that. But yeah, that's, I guess if I was to, I mean, there's dozens of tracks like any of these, they're just for fun, but that's probably 5 of my all-time favourites. I wanted to put the Prophet's Song by Queen in there from Night at the Opera. Everyone obviously knows Bohemian Rhapsody really well, and the Prophet's Song to me is possibly even better. I know that's sacrilege to some people. It's a brilliant composition with fantastic those layered vocals in it, a whole section in the middle with those layered vocals, Freddie's lead. It's got the dramatic time changes and pauses in it. It's got brilliant guitar, everything done because they had no keyboards, with guitars, all the different sounds. It's a very dark and powerful song. So I know Pope, you know that one, that song quite well. But
can you sing it?
Yeah. Oh no, listen to them. That's all I can remember.
Oh, that one. Okay.
Yeah. So the Prophet Song, yeah, it's really brilliant track. And it's probably their most progressive composition ever, I think.
I'd put some of the ones from Queen 1 and 2 up there. Great King Rat comes to mind with that change in time signatures and a whole bunch of different compositional elements to it.
Yeah, I think there's stuff on the first two albums are definitely like Good King Rat. These are in the same category as Prophet's Song. There's also some stuff on Sheer Heart Attack, like even Brighton Rock, which, yes, it's a faster rock tune. I think has got some prog side to it, you know. And in the Lap of the Gods, the extended part of that. So Queen really were. I just think they're an incredible band. I mean, they could rock hard, they could do rockabilly, they showed they could funk out.
Yeah, I mean, on Queen 2, you have they have so many different sounds on the same album too. Like you would have songs like Ogre Battle, which is, you know, proto power metal, and then you'd also have, you know, things like March of the Black Queen.
Oh, I love that one, yeah. And the song White Queen, which is one of their tracks, is brilliant in a similar vein. Yeah, they deserve to be on there, and I do love that. If you ever hear the Prophet song, especially with headphones on, it's hypnotic. And they're all done without keyboards, of course, which is an incredible achievement for any band to make something so sophisticated without having to overlay guitars and vocals just to do those sounds. But I like the Xanadu clip there. Xanadu clip, which I think is from the 1980 tour, I might be wrong, where they've both got the twin neck guitars, which is it's really neat. That's very Rush.
I will say that guitar intro to Xanadu is one of the best pieces they've ever done, in my opinion. Just that sheer piercing guitar tone is just perfect.
Yeah, and then again, there's so many Rush songs you could pick, but I think I wanted to go for something that was a single composition rather than something too long, and that one for me is the one I always go back to. And I can play a little bit of the bass on that and stuff, and it's one of my favourites. But yeah, I mean, there's some obvious stuff in there. Firth of Fifth, I'm Selling England by the Pound. I'll always go back to that song. It's my favourite Genesis song. I just love it to death. It's majestic. It's got that beautiful piano intro, which they don't do live. They never do that piano intro live. They skip it, and they used to skip it in the old days because they couldn't afford to take a grand piano around with them on tour. So it's a grand piano piece. So Tony Banks used to play it on an electric keyboard, and it sounded terrible. So they just said eventually, skip it. We'll just come in at the bit where the vocal comes in, and. That Gabriel vocal's beautiful. The lyrics are all around free. There's a sort of a libertarian edge to them a little bit, and the solos in the middle. You got the Gabriel's flute solo, but then there's a Steve Hackett, one of his best solos ever, which is virtually all pure sustain. It's not he's not shredding or anything. It's all sustain notes, using the sustain to do the solo. It's just beautiful. So love that song. Anyway, that was 5 of my favourites. What have I missed that you guys would say, well, you really got to have that in there? Individual songs or albums?
Question by the Moody Blues would have been on my list.
It's a good one, yeah, good.
A lot of the Moody Blues would have been on my list, but
yeah, I haven't talked about them a lot today, but they're a hugely important band in progressive rock. You know, they really started a lot of it. And then in the early to mid 70s, they really did some great stuff like Question. Yeah.
So I wouldn't disagree with any one of your lists. I would replace Xanadu with 2112 for Rush, just because the sheer import of that song and just the amazing musicianship on that whole record was just mind blowing to me. First time I spun it, and I would probably replace Prophet song with Seven Seas of Rye.
All right, yeah. Great record. I love that record. That was probably the first. Well, I think maybe that was the second Queen record I ever heard as a kid. It was, I think, "Keep Yourself Alive" might have been the first because that was on the first album. But there's a short clip of Seven Seas of Rye on the end of the first album, like a prelude.
Seven Seas of Rye is on the first album. It's the last song.
Is it the other way around? I thought there was a prelude to it. Is it "Keep Yourself Alive" that's on the second album?
Those are both first record, I think. I just listened to that record today.
I thought Seven Seas of Rye was on both the first and the second, but maybe they're different in North America and from Britain. Maybe they're different releases. There was a prelude to Seven Seas of Rye on the end of the first album in Britain, and then the full track was on the second album.
And that was a weird thing with the UK and US back in the day, where you could have the same album in the US and UK and have two different track lists.
Oh yeah.
Oh, absolutely, and different covers. different covers, different everything. Yeah,
I mean,
it's kind of annoying in retrospect.
In the case of Hellbent for Leather by Judas Priest, it's actually called Killing Machine in English.
That's right, yeah. So when people talk about Hellbent for Leather, I think they're just talking about Toxic Man Flu's sexual proclivities, you know? It's
yeah, and Rubber Soul had a whole different track list in the US.
Yeah.
Almost every Beatles record had a very different listing in the UK.
Beatles albums were absolutely trashed in North America from the British versions. The British versions were how they intended them, but Capitol just took them and chopped them up to get extra albums out of them. Threw B-sides in and stuff, and it wasn't until Revolver the Beatles put their foot down and said enough. Revolver will be the same everywhere, because up to that point they'd been absolutely ruined. I mean, they're not the same at all in North America. So Toxic Man Flu, they call me Leathercock. Anyway, yeah, but that's. I mean, one of these days as well, to me, I mean, everyone loves Dark Side of the Moon, but one of these days to me is the epitome of Floyd.
I'd probably replace that with Echoes.
Echoes, yeah, brilliant again. I mean, there's no poor choices, but
I mean, One of These Days is actually my second favorite song on that album, so it's kind of a.
And I love the hypnotic. I don't know whether he did it with the bass or a keyboard, but it's like almost like a early sequencer rhythm in it, and it goes through. I just love the way they use that in it.
It's one of the best songs to see in one of the Laser Light 3D spectaculars too.
All right, yeah.
By far.
Oh, it is. It's very trippy, very spacey, and that's what I like. Attracted me to that era of Floyd stuff. It was very spacey. Interstellar Overdrive, the same, you know. But One of These Days, that version's the Pompeii one. The later version on, I think it's the Pulse, without Roger Waters, that version of Floyd, I love the way that in the instrumental period in the middle, they slipped the Doctor Who theme in briefly. So the theme to Doctor Who, he's playing it on the guitar. So I always loved that fact. But I like the spacey stuff, which is why I'm not a huge Yes fan. I found it very noodly, very like Rick Wakeman said, you know, half of it is like, you know, it's very self-indulgent. But Starship Trooper I love, because when I was a kid, and I was a kid when that came out, it was like, I love that book. I love that book. And we want to hear that record, what it's like. And it is one of their more kind of all-in rock records, which appealed to me. And Steve Howe is probably his best solo on that, for me. I do like Going for the One as an album, Yes album, and Wondrous Stories is a beautiful song. So that era, but most Yes stuff I'm not as keen on. I'm much more of a Genesis, Pink Floyd guy. Anyway, that's my favourites. I'm not sure.
It's a good list.
Not bad. Courtney's got Comfortably Numb there, and of course, I mean, just that colossal solo. It regularly ends up on the top solos of all time. Dave Gilmour does this. First one's great, but later in the song, and he ends the song with that solo. It's just, you never get tired of listening to that, especially very loud.
Oh yeah. There's only one correct way to listen to Pink Floyd, and that is as loud as possible.
Exactly, and I think it belies the lighter proggy stuff, of which earlier Genesis was. It was quite twiddly 12-string guitars, and Floyd were always a rock band as well as a progressive band, and they did rock. There's some pretty hard stuff. I mean,
there are two types of bands. Like I put Rush and Floyd on the very much a rock band with prog elements category. Yeah. And then there's bands like Yes, Genesis, where they're a lot more of a prog band than has rock elements.
Yeah, I agree with you there, mate. Absolutely. So.
Okay, so then would you consider Child in Time by Deep Purple a prog song?
It is a prog song, but it's also a very, very rock tune.
Mm-hmm.
It's very proggy. It's proto-prog for sure. I mean, it's lengthy, it's moody, it's got great lyrical themes, instrumentation. They're trying to do more with the instrumentation they've got, you know, particularly the drum. Actually, I love a lot of the cymbals work on that by Ian Pace. So, I think it's very proggy, that, yeah.
Another one we didn't touch on that I'd like you guys' take on it, Jefferson Airplane. You guys consider him prog or just acid rock, like White Rabbit?
more
That was
psychedelic
true.
acid.
No, that's definitely on the psychedelic side of things.
Okay.
Yeah, I think We Built This
Yeah, I'd
City
have to
is more
agree.
prog. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Jefferson Starship.
Yeah.
They did
We're
Prague.
talking-
They went
we're
from
talking-
one band to another to another.
Jefferson
they
who?
progress. Yeah.
Actually, Legalized Adulthood are a good friend of the show and a peer panel member. Star Rider by Foreigner. I love that song, and it is definitely a prog song by Foreigner. That's one of my favorites, especially live. It's brilliant, that song live. So
Yeah.
that's a good choice. Yeah,
I like
great
the way
choice.
Brahma just said that. Instead of saying, is it Prague? Perhaps we should ask, does it Prague?
Does it prog? That's a great.
Yeah.
Does it prog? I wish I'd thought of that for my little logos that I did. Does it prog? Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff in there, and then we've never even. Well, I say we've not touched on modern stuff. Imperatus particularly introduced me to a few bands there that I hadn't thought of or heard.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like Prague, like I told you on Gilded the other day, it's pretty much Rush, yes, especially more, I guess I hate to say it, like the poppy, yes, like Roundabout or Owner of a Lonely Heart. I really dig
those are
that
good.
stuff. But it's more of like the somewhat more prog metal sort of things, like Opeth, like their album Ghost Reveries is incredibly proggy for some pretty heavy metal with some death metal style lyrics. But unlike a lot of the other death metal, it just sounds like a guttural growl. Michael Ackerfeld has a very distinct voice, and he enunciates what he's saying. So even though it's got a growl to it, you can hear and understand what he's saying. There's a lot of storytelling, there's a lot of experimentation with music, but within what they do. And I'm also, like I said, a big fan of Porcupine Tree.
Well, and Ghost
Yeah,
Reveries
they're
came
good.
out after Damnation,
Yeah.
which was an entirely prog rock Opeth album.
Yeah.
No,
So
one band from the more modern era that has a lot of prog elements in some of their stuff is Gojira.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to say Coheed and Cambria.
Definitely.
They were
Definitely.
very proggy when they came out.
But this is good because it means prog didn't die. It just went underground for a while. One or two bands like Marillion and some of the metal bands continued some proggy stuff, and then new bands appeared that were no longer seen as uncool or unhip, and like Dream Theater and Porcupine Tree and the
Well, here's
Flag.
one for the guys who might know
went
this
on.
one. How did people feel about Merciful Fate being proggy?
I'm okay with it.
I could see that, yeah. They certainly had some prog elements in there.
You know, they definitely had the storytelling, maybe not so much as across an album, but definitely via songs, incredible technical musicianship, and also at the same time doing something, for lack of a better term, different with King Diamond being a trained opera singer.
Yeah.
And they also included one hell of a stage show to go along with all of it.
Yeah, and King
So
Diamond
that
has a hell of a
ticks
way
the
of telling
boxes.
stories through the lyrics. It's just breathtaking the way he can just bring you right into the story.
That ticks all the boxes, absolutely. I mean, it's those are the elements I think that are key. This, the technical virtuosity, the storytelling, the performance and presentation, and the vocal that you mentioned there is key. Those are not things your average 4-chord band has got.
Yeah, they were Merciful Fate nor King Diamond solo project you could consider a 4-chord band at all.
Not
So
that
if
many
stage
4-chord
theatrics,
bands.
if stage theatrics are considered prog, does that make Alice Cooper prog?
There's a strong element of that. Yes, I mean, Alice Cooper, the band, as opposed to the person, the solo artist. Those albums were pretty proggy in places. They had strong concepts, strong visuals,
Fanciful
dramatic
ideas.
performances. Yeah.
I still think it's funny that we talk about this massive like overblown stage show as a hallmark of prog, and yet one of the bands we've been talking about stripped down to the bare bones for a 4-piece for Live Aid and became one of the greatest rock performances of all time.
That's right, Queen. Yeah. The live thing is interesting because a lot of these guys, and I think Peter Gabriel is an example of the way he used to dress up with Genesis. A lot of these guys didn't start out that way. I think they started out very much as just 4 guys with their amps standing and playing. But I think as the music developed, I think they felt the a performance element was required to go with it. So they started to dress up, they started to act outrageous, they started to get with the big lighting rigs, the lasers, the whatever. You would think that was against what they stood for, which was technical virtuosity in music, but they seem to welcome it and embrace that theatrics. It's weird.
But maybe there's three or four different branches of prog that have progressed from those early bands. You've got the theatrical, you've got the different instrument elements, you've got the concept album, and then you've just got kind of straight prog without having the stage show and all that stuff. Yeah. Because like one of the bands I was going to bring up that's right there on the verge of where your cutoff is, I think Queensryche did a lot of things that very much took from Pink Floyd, adding in sound clips, adding in different sound effects and stuff into the songs.
They even have the concept album down with Operation Mindcrime.
Yeah.
Good call. I'd forgotten about them, yeah.
We haven't really talked about Frank Zappa all that much either.
No, we did we mention him earlier? I know that
you showed an image of him, but that was about it.
Yeah, I think back Salty and I were talking about him backstage before we started, and I think Frank Zappa is a very important element in prog, and he was a progressive artist, probably the most progressive artist if you think about it, in that he never did the same thing twice, and I think he's definitely in this category. Yeah.
What about Warren Zevon?
Warren, I see more as a hard rock artist rather than a rock artist, straightforward rock artist rather than a progressive rock. I think the difference is Zappa would instrumentally went all sorts of places, jazz, orchestral, world music. He had everything in there, including his own stuff that nobody had ever heard of, and he was very classically motivated. I mean, this guy's a guy who could actually write scores, so I think he's very much the definition of a progressive artist. I actually like him when he's just doing rock. Like Hot Rats is my favourite Frank Zappa album, principally because of Willie the Pimp. That song is just a full-on guitar, blast of the solos in it are just killer. That's when he did straightforward rock, but I think he's very much a progressive artist, absolutely. And a huge influence on many others. He's probably the equivalent in Britain would have been Robert Fripp and King Crimson, except they were stuck to more of a jazzy thing eventually. But
on Joe's Garage, Frank Zappa had an entire track that was just getting a blowjob from a robot, and to me, that's very prog.
That's about as prog as you can get.
Mm-hmm.
And I love my favourite cover of his is "Shake Your Booty," of course, where he's got the Arab gear on, but "Shake Your Booty." I just thought that was the funniest thing ever because it was the disco era.
You guys do any golden earring before I came on?
Nope. Nope.
That's a good one.
I do like Radar Love and Twilight Zone, but I'm not sure. I'm not so familiar with the other stuff. Focus, of course, another European band, would be very much in the prog category. Any band with a flute, and they've got a flute. So. Traffic, of course, were a band that I would consider as an early prog band, and Procol Harum.
Yeah.
Procol Harum, Salty Dog, and Grand Hotel, and albums like that are pretty proggy, I have to say. And they were a band that suffered badly when New Wave came in. I think they just split and said, we've had enough. Because that day was over. They were still making concept albums, and they didn't reinvent themselves like Yes did or Genesis did. So they were done.
But Steve Winwood is not prog.
Steve Winwood has been prog. He has had prog tendencies, but he is not prog. Depends what you'd call Ark of a Diver. He did play every instrument on it, and I think it's more of a pop rock album, though.
He's under prog suspicion.
Prog suspicion, that's right. There's a warrant out for him to be investigated.
Now you guys just got me questioning other bands like Toto.
Toto are an interesting group, full stop, because of their background. I mean, all top session guys.
Yeah.
These are the guys that played on a lot of Steely Dan stuff and whatever. Great musicians, and they could do prog, but they also loved the catchy pop hits. So they're almost like a thing of their own. Certain bands are just their own thing, like Steely Dan, who could also
Steely Dan
be,
doesn't really fit in any category. They're just, they are who they are.
they are Steely Dan. That's their category. And I do love the name of the band, of course. It's a very meaningful name. Toxic will know what the name means. He's experienced the Steely Dan himself, I think. But yeah, there are bands that are unclassifiable. I think Toto is possibly one of them. Steely Dan are definitely unclassifiable. And people could say, well, they're a bit of a jazzy rock band. No, there's nobody else that sounds like Steely Dan. Or Terry Wogan. So, gentlemen, I am unfortunately under a bit of time pressure because I got to wrap up because today is my 24th wedding anniversary and I've promised my wife I would devote some time to her today rather than YouTube.
Happy anniversary.
Yeah, happy anniversary,
on that, buddy.
24 years married, 25 together, so it's not bad going for round 2 for the second time round. This one it stuck. This time it stuck. Even if she doesn't know the difference between Foreigner and Kansas. I'm trying to teach her.
But she'll still go with you.
She'll go grudgingly go with me to Foreigner. But she did introduce me to a lot of good music, so I can't like Miles Davis we mentioned earlier. She's into stuff like that. So. And she's seen a lot of good stuff in her time, so I'm willing to give her the benefit of the doubt, even though she doesn't really know who Foreigner are. Mick Jones of Foreigner is a very interesting guy because he and I could make a whole show about Foreigner if anyone's up for it. Congratulations and condolences. Equally, Thomason says, it's. But for Mick Jones, years ago in the 60s, was in Johnny Halliday's band. The French rock and roll singer. It was throughout the 60s. So Johnny Halliday was supporting the Beatles on their first gig in Paris at the Olympia. And they thought, they went up to chat to Johnny Halliday and his band, and Mick Jones is talking to them, and they said, "Oh, you've got a great English accent, haven't you?" You know, because they thought he was French. He says, "No, I'm a Brit." You know. But later on, through Johnny Halliday, he got to hang out with people like Brigitte Bardot. So he was very circumspect in his book about it, but he said that was pretty good fun at the time.
Which is that the most insulting thing you can say to an Englishman is call him French?
Yeah. Or most insulting thing you can say to a Scotsman is to call them English. To an Englishman, it would be to call them French. Yeah. He was working in France, so what the hell, you know. But yeah, you got to meet Brigitte Bardot and party with her and a bunch of other people because of being in Johnny Halliday's band. So he had a good time.
Out as Steely Dan.
Yes, he had a Steely Dan, probably. Yeah, well, anyway, so thank you, everybody. I'd like to thank everyone in the chat for being here. Those who've put up with, a long sentence since 24 years, yeah. Probably another 24 to go, I hope. But Mick Jones got married twice to the same lady. And it's, funnily enough, there's Mick Jones of Foreigner and Mick Jones of The Clash. And Mick Jones of The Clash met Mick Jones of Foreigner once, and he said, I think Mick Jones said something of Clash, said something like, "I wish I had your royalties," because he wasn't getting nearly as much money as Foreigners. But they used to get their names would be mistaken quite naturally for each other. So yeah, thanks everyone for being here. You've contributed all brilliantly as usual. Cosmic Squirrel, lovely Sherry, Courtney, thank you for being on yet again. E. Clay Thomason, Sentient Dildo, is always great to see you. Toxic Man Flu, we have a love-hate relationship. You love yourself and I hate you for it. Disaster, sorry buddy, I do love you. Disaster Area, you have nailed it with the British references tonight, top man. There are many others in the chat, and I'm scrolling back to make sure I don't miss anybody. Legalize Adulthood, thanks for joining us, mate. We'll definitely be streaming again soon. D. Bud Martin, Dr. Forbin, Colossus, that's one of my favourite movies, Dr. Forbin. I'm just trying to think of the title. Colossus, that's it, the Forbin Project. Great movie. Sexy Chat XYZ, thank you for being here. I hope we meet in person someday. And I'm scrolling back, and if I missed anybody, my apologies, but you've all been here and you've all been great, and thank you for supporting me in the channel. I would like to also thank my wonderful panel who have stuck through this, through thick and thin, and some of it's been pretty thin, I have to say. So my apologies for that. Technical difficulties. So we've got to give you the chance to just do your thing. So Pope Metallicus, may you go first. And what's up with you, my friend? We're just coming up soon.
How's it going, guys? Chat, you guys have been amazing as always. You can check me out this weekend. On Sunday, I'll be doing a stream on the early Metallica era with Emperor Andromeda and Imperatus over here. So that should be a good time. In the meantime, you can check out my server on Gilded. I'm usually hanging out in either 70s rock bands or mine. And me and Imperatus have a game of MechWarrior 5 going if anyone wants to join. So that should be a fun time.
Cool. And thank you for mentioning our Lord and Savior Gilded.
Yes.
All hail. Imperatus, my friend, what have you got for us?
Well, thanks as always for having me on. Like I've said before, I do enjoy talking to people about music, even if I'm not wholly informed on the topic. It gives me a chance to learn some new stuff. As Pope said, I'm going to be on his channel next Sunday. We're going to be talking the first 4 Metallica albums, I believe.
Yep.
And then I just recently put out another album review. I put out a video talking about the 3rd Marduk album, Opus Nocturne. That's up on my channel. And I'll probably be putting out another album review this week. I'll probably do 1 to 2 a week since they're pretty easy to do. Other than that, you can find me on various other streams. I'm usually on the Foul Ball Productions MF or Cocktail Lounge. And other than that, usually you see me in a lot of chats.
Cool. Thank you, sir. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it very much.
Anytime you want me on, bud.
And now to my brother in YouTube, Darius, my friend. What are you up to these days? How's your channel getting on?
Well, I'm working on some new show formats, so I can bring the channel back. And I've actually been invited as a guest on ETEP's show this Wednesday, so
nice.
I'm pretty excited about that. And like you, he plans things, so it's a whole new world.
That's why he's probably aging rapidly like me.
I just want to say, in conclusion, not all experimental rock, art rock, psychedelic rock are prog. Not all space rock, synth rock, or math rock are progressive. Post rock and shoegaze are not progressive. Not all long songs or concept albums are progressive rock. And not all symphonic rock, folk rock, except if they have a flute, then they're definitely progressive rock. And not all stage theatrics are prog rock. But prog is something that you know it when you hear it, and it's definitely not punk.
I think you've nailed something there.
I hope so.
Is a crack rock a prog rock?
Yeah.
Only if you dip it in acid.
Is grog rock something pirates do? I don't know. Cam's in the chat as well. Thanks for being here, buddy. I gotta apologize to everybody for the I've been trying to fix these bots, and I switched off the Streamlabs bot, and it's still in the chat. So I don't know. I've logged out of it, and it's totally gone, and it's still doing it. The night bot I logged out of ages ago, and it's still doing it. So I'm gonna have to kill them somehow. I don't know what they're doing. I'm sorry about that. Didn't mean to spam it. And I'd like to thank those who've been modding as well for looking after that stuff, because without a producer, Toxic, you should be my producer.
And thank you, Sherry, for dropping all those links.
I know, well played,
Yes, thank
Sherry.
you.
Thank you. Yeah. So thanks for taking care of that, guys, because I'm an old man. I can only handle 3 screens at once. Any more than that, and I'm flummoxed. So we're still left with my very good friend and future Stanley Cup second round fan of the Colorado Avalanche, our good friend Brahma Bull.
Getting going tomorrow night. Yep. Looking forward to it. Yeah, you can catch me. Well, I'm on my channel doing a few videos now. I'll be on Yelling at Parked Cars in a couple hours. And actually where I'm heading to next is to go hang out in the chat as another Dix Division member, Sir Talks a Lot, interviews one of our favorite Aussies, Mr. Grant Gregory, I believe. I think that started a few minutes ago, so we should probably go raid them. But thank you, 70s. It was fun being on panel. Always good to hear everybody's thoughts, and chat. You guys are awesome. Have a good night.
Thanks for being here, brother. You're welcome anytime. And yeah, Brahma and I are plotting a liquor special. So I'm close to getting a hold of that bottle that I've identified a store that has it. It's just 2 hours away, and I'm trying to persuade someone to bring it to me rather than me have to go to them. So
well, that or we can find a different one. There's plenty of liquor.
I want to try that one now. I want to try it. So yeah, thank you folks for being here. Really appreciate it very much. And thanks chat. So next no show next week because I'm doing them every second week given the prep that's involved and the fact I'm working shifts. But I will probably be working on a couple of new videos in the interim and maybe even a radio show. I've got to do my Prog. I'll have to do a Prog special of my radio show. So. But I can just put one Yes album on and then walk away for 3 hours and it'll just do its own thing. But so till then, keep on rocking, keep your mellotrons dry, and I hope you all stay well. And I will play you out with some kind of outro. Oh, here we go. And good night to you all.